Members, Senate will come to order. Senator Paxton, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. Take up and consider Committee Substitute Senate Bill 13.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members. I move to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider the committee substitute to Senate Bill 13. Members, this body has shown tremendous bipartisan agreement on the need to protect minor children from sexually explicit material that is labeled as harmful material in the Penal Code. Last session, to protect children online, we unanimously passed a measure to require age verification for access to online porn sites. We also unanimously passed the SCOPE Act to protect minors on social media, a provision of which required social media platforms to prevent minors' exposure to harmful material. One element of the SCOPE Act was creation of the Bipartisan Joint Committee to study the effects of media on minors, to which I was appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and very honored to serve. During the interim, this committee listened to difficult but compelling testimony about the damaging impact of, among other things, sexually explicit material on children's brains, relationships, and behaviors, further underscoring the real and present need to protect our children from sexually explicit material. To date, this session, this body has already heard and unanimously passed legislation specifically addressing the protection of children, including a bill relating to AI-generated sexually explicit material, and numerous other bills which have been filed, heard, and passed in committees and are now making their way to the Senate floor, all in the name of protecting our children from harmful material, sexually explicit material. However, sexually explicit material is not confined to the internet or social media. Some of it takes the form of books, and unfortunately, some of these sexually explicit books have found their way into our school libraries, and then into the hands, and then the eyes, and then the minds of our little children. Senate Bill 13 addresses the presence of such material, sexually explicit material called harmful material in the Penal Code, in our school libraries. It tasks school boards, the duly elected by and hence accountable members of their local communities, with the job of choosing what or approving what library materials will be present in their local schools. Senate Bill 13 provides increased structure and transparency to the processes and standards for school library book acquisition and the review policies to ensure that school library collections are appropriate for their campuses based on developmental suitability for those grade levels and on local community values. Recommendations for library material acquisition will continue to be initiated by librarians, but will additionally be reviewed by an advisory council consisting of parents and community members appointed by the school board members. Final approval will rest with the school board in advance of spending any taxpayer dollars on library material procurement. The bill also includes a reconsideration process, and it gives parents transparency and control over content available to their own children. No child should pick up a book in their school library of all places and see sexually explicit, harmful material within its pages. Their young brains cannot unsee what they have seen. I'd like to thank the Lieutenant Governor for prioritizing the address of this issue to ensure that our school libraries adhere to the same standards of protection that we already recognize in other settings regarding what is appropriate and what is not for young eyes. Members, I know that most of us come to the floor each day prepared and with our minds made up often on the bills before us. I ask that each of us open our minds and our hearts to these words for the sake of the children of Texas. The purpose of this bill, clear and simple, is to protect our children from sexually explicit material. Members, we have stood together, united across party lines on this issue in the online and digital spaces repeatedly. And I'm honored that there is already bipartisan support for this legislation. I'm also grateful for the many of you who have joint authored this bill. As one senator said eloquently yesterday, no one on this floor supports obscenity, pornography, or any similar materials in our schools. Members, this is our opportunity to make good on those words with action and to stand together as a whole, united Senate to extend that protection to Texas school children. I move to suspend.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. Questions of the author.
Do you yield, Senator Paxton?
I do.
You recognize Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Paxton. First and foremost, bless you, Senator Perry. First and foremost, let me say thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your diligent work. I know that we both agree 100% that we don't want any child exposed to any kind of pornography, indecent material whatsoever. I have a few questions for legislative intent because I have some concerns, but I think we share them, and I don't think your intention is to hurt our libraries in any way. So, but even though we may disagree with what may or may not happen, so that's why I wanted to ask you. One of the concerns that I think we've already seen from HB 900 last session, some libraries stopped buying library books altogether. I think you're aware of that. Are you not?
Some of those concerns were shared with our office, and just as not an aside, but a comment on some of your remarks. I don't believe for a second that protecting our kids will require us to hurt our libraries.
And I agree. And so what I want to do is how can we, and I know that you have a desire just to have a few more eyes on the process. One of my concerns is slowing down the ability for librarians to buy books to the point where they couldn't spend their annual budgets. And the reason I bring that up is many of our larger school districts are purchasing about 100 books a month. And on your bill as written, I believe that the Library Advisory Council only has to meet twice a year. And so I'm worried about the potential limit on their ability to purchase enough to fulfill their budget.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Now, this bill is really about making sure that taxpayer dollars are not going toward the pornographic materials, like you mentioned, for children. It is not intended to limit the purchase of library books in general. And, we know the important role that school libraries play in developing love of reading and of learning and creating lifelong learners, really.
Absolutely.
To clarify, the bill does say that the council will meet at least twice a year.
Okay.
However, there is an amendment that I'm about to offer that will kind of clear that up a little bit more and allow for those councils to meet more often as needed in order to fulfill the duty.
Well, thank you. That helps with the potential for the delays in the purchases. And so you and I and my team and your team have talked about the concerns about immediate purchases, but in talking to your team and I think we've had those concerns addressed. So, I have a lot of librarians who have expressed a great deal of concern. At the end of the day, there should be no tax dollars going to any pornographic material or indecent materials, period, the end. But I'm glad that you've working this out to make sure that kids do have the books they need and that they're purchased in a safe way and that librarians can buy the books, still be a part of the process. So thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Thank you, Senator Menendez, and we always love working with your office. You help us think through things in a deep and meaningful way, and we appreciate it. Make the bill
Appreciate
better.
that. Thank you.
Member Senator Paxton moves suspension of the regular order of business. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco,
There
Campbell.
being 22 ayes and 9 nays, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Committee Substitute Senate Bill 13. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 13 relating to school district's library materials and catalog.
Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment Number 1 by Paxton.
Senator Paxton on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is the amendment that I referenced when speaking with Senator Menendez. It adds further clarity to the timelines included in the bill based on testimony, input, and questions that our office has received. First, the amendment clarifies that the local school library advisory council may meet more often than the minimum of twice per year if necessary to fulfill its duties. The amendment also specifies that the school board shall consider the recommendation of the advisory council for proposed procurement lists or for challenge material in the school board's next public meeting after the council makes its recommendation. This provides a deadline for the school board to act on the council's recommendations. Finally, the amendment clarifies that the council shall meet to provide recommendations on proposed procurement lists and that this meeting may coincide with the 30-day public review period on that list. I move adoption of the floor amendment.
Members, Senator Paxton moves adoption of floor amendment number 1. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, floor amendment number 1 is adopted. Senator Paxton, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage to engrossment.
Members, Senator Paxton moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton.
There being 22 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is passed to engrossment. We'll hold there, Senator Paxton.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members.
Senator Miles, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. Take up and consider Senate Bill 290.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, at this time, I move to suspend Senate regular order business to take up consideration Senate Bill 290. Remember, this bill stems from a real situation in my district, but it could affect communities across the state. Back in 2021, property owners in Southwest Crossing neighborhood discovered that a peak shaving natural gas storage facility was built within 500 feet of their homes. Under Railroad Commission rules, any installation of 10,000 gallons or more required notice to all property owners within a 500 feet radius. However, some property owners never received the notice. It was later found that the Post Oak Post Office had unilaterally signed for the certificates by mail and simply left the letters meaning the residents were never properly informed. Senate Bill 290 codifies many of the notice procedures to the property owners that already exist in Railroad Commission rules, with two key differences. The entity that signs out the notice must make sure that the notice was delivered. The entity must retain proof of delivery for the period determined by the Railroad Commission. This bill is about transparency and accountability. Homeowners should be assured that they will receive notice about projects that affect their property and their companies that should be able to prove that they comply with notice requirements. And I move final passage of Senate Bill 290. Move to suspend constitutional rules to read the bill 3 days and move to pass 290.
Member Senator Miles moves suspension of the regular order of business. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
There being 23 ayes and 8 nays, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 290. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 290 relating to notice to property owners regarding certain stationary LP gas installations.
Senator Miles, you're recognized for a motion.
Move final passage to Senate Bill 290.
Member Senator Miles moves passage to engrossment.
Engrossment, I'm sorry.
There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell,
Being
Blanco.
23 ayes and 8 nays, the bills passed to engrossment will hold there. Senator Miles.
Mr. President, I move final passage. Let's move final pass. Do you move it? Do you hold it? You're gonna hold it? I wasn't listening, I'm sorry.
Senator Miles, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. So moved. Move to suspend the
Members.
constitutional right. So moved. Final passage.
Okay. Members, Senator Miles moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
There being 25 ayes and 6 nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lays it on third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 290. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 290 relating to notice to property owners regarding certain stationary LP gas installation.
Senator Miles, you're recognized for a motion.
Move final passage, Mr. Chair.
Members, Senator Miles moves final passage. Senate Bill 290. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell,
There being
Blanco.
22 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is finally passed. Congratulations, Senator Miles.
Thank you. Thank you, members.
Senator King, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. Take and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 6.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this has been a complex bill. Let me kind of give you a little background real quick, remind all of us how we got here. So if you remember when we left last session in 2023, the PUC and ERCOT had said, hey, the most electricity we'll use on any given day is 87 gigawatts. And by 2029, you're going to need to be at 110 gigawatts. That's what demand will be. Well, that was really intimidating. And if you remember, we passed the Texas Energy Fund, was Chairman Swartner's bill, and did some other things to try to encourage building dispatchable electricity to meet that really challenging demand of going from 86 to 110 in just 5 years. Well, then we had an interim hearing in B&C in June of this last year, and the PUC and ERCOT came in and said, well, it's changed. Instead of having to go from 86 gigawatts to 110 by 2029, we need to go from 86 gigawatts to 150 and probably more by 2030. And that's getting real close to doubling the amount of electricity that we're going to use on our hottest and coldest days, and have to be prepared for that and beyond that with generation. And so we had a couple of hearings and formed a stakeholders group and tried to figure out what was actually causing this, worked very closely with ERCOT. And the bottom line is, a lot of it's just our growth. I mean, a lot of it, we're having a lot of large load growth. That's generally things that we use 75 megawatts or more at their facility. It's chip manufacturing, it's hyperscalers like a Google or an Amazon cloud service. It's the electrification of the Permian Basin, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but almost 20% of that new delta was the Permian Basin switching over from diesel and other things that have been running pumps and moving product to switching to electricity to drive those processes, fracking and other things as well. Data centers are a huge part of it. They are the fastest growing part of that, and that's what we'll kind of talk about in a little bit of detail in a minute. The data centers are kind of new to us. We've always had them, but never with the AI chips and all the fast growth. And we've got a lot of people wanting to move to Texas and build data centers. And let me say this before we go anywhere else. We want them here. They are great corporate citizens. They don't create a ton of jobs, but they support every single job that's out there. On your iPhone, on the Quicken that you use at your office, everything, all the complex work that takes place in our factories and workplace and here at the Capitol and everything is cloud-based supported. We want those data centers here. We want them because of what they provide in services, but we also want them because we want Texas to always be associated with whatever the newest, greatest, fastest technology is. And that today is AI and data centers. So we want them here, but they do pose, along with all our other large loads, a significant challenge. And let me just give you an example of this. So Senator Nichols, for example, represents Lufkin and Nacogdoches. So there is one very mid-size data center that's going in that area. That one data center, that one tilt wall building, that one warehouse in Nacogdoches will use more electricity every day than the cities of Lufkin and Nacogdoches combined. Senator Birdwell, he's around here somewhere, there he is, Mr. President. You have Waco and Hillsboro. There is a data center in the queue for the Waco area. That one tilt wall building, that one single warehouse will use more electricity on any given day than the cities of Waco and Hillsboro combined. That's the scale of power consumption that we're talking about. Rio Grande Valley. The Rio Grande Valley, haven't had electricity there for 135 years, uses about 3 gigawatts of power. The Stargate data center in Abilene that's under construction now, by 2030 will use 5 to 6 gigawatts of electricity. So that one group of tilt wall warehouses full of computers in Abilene by 2030 will use almost twice as much of electricity as the entire Rio Grande Valley uses on any given day. That's a bunch of electricity. And the question is, how do we get that power available? If you run short on power, what happens? Well, you run the risk of brownouts. You could have terrible situations like Uri, where people died in their homes, froze to death in 2021. But you for sure get scarcity. Scarcity leads to higher prices, infrastructure growth, and all those costs get passed down to all the people that we're down here working for. So, oh, and by the way, it's interesting. The data centers and all the large loads, they will not use, in the contracts they make, they will not use renewable electricity. They won't use wind and solar and battery also for their power generation, because they have to be able to run, particularly data centers, 24/7. And so the electricity that they're going out and contracting with is literally taking the best, the most reliable electricity out of the marketplace. And so that's a real challenge for us too. So anyway, there was a stakeholders group, large stakeholders group across all sectors of the industry, and we met for the last 7 months. And we came up with really what we think are 4 solutions that are all encapsulated in SB 6. The first one deals with transparency so that we can have accurate forecasts. One of the problems we found was at first, it was 110 gigawatts we had to get up to, then it was 150, and now they're saying more. Part of the problem for that is we have a long list of companies that are in the queues in different utility sectors, different utility franchise footprints, and they're in there getting in line saying we're going to build a data center or some other large load. Well, you don't know for sure that they're for real, or are they just a speculator at this point? There's nothing wrong with being a speculator, because what they'll do is they may be looking at 2 or 3 sites, maybe one of them in another state, and they're just seeing where they can get the best deal, where it comes together the best. And so one of the problems we had was there wasn't accurate forecasting. One utility alone in the North Texas area, they did a run for us. How many large loads, almost all data centers, are in your construction queue? Your interconnect. They've made an interconnection request to connect to the grid within that utility. That one utility had 131 gigawatts of interconnection requests in the queue. 131. Now, obviously, the majority of those are not going to happen. Is it going to be 20%? It's going to be 10%? Well, even 20%, 26 gigawatts is a ton of power. And so one of the things this bill does is set up some confidential reporting to the utilities and some proof of concept so that they can weed through and find out who is a real deal, who do we really need to start planning for, because as you plan, you also begin to work toward building infrastructure to support those needs. And you don't want to overbuild, because then that money gets all passed down needlessly to consumers. You don't want to underbuild, because then you run out of electricity. So transparency is a big part of this. Also, another issue that's came up, and this is really a new thing, is where some of the large loads, primarily data centers, are wanting to do direct contracts with an existing electric power plant, a facility. And there were some negotiations going on with one of the nuclear power units in the Glen Rose area. There's 2 units there. They both produce 1,200 megawatts of electricity. And the negotiations were, I'm just using this as an example because there's many others, that was for this one tech company to purchase all the electricity off of that nuclear unit. And they would take the nuclear unit actually off the grid, so it was not there for use. Well, that was a whole new situation for Texas. It's not only someone using a lot of electricity, but it would be actually removing power plants from the electric power grid, ones that we're relying on heavily today. And you can imagine what would happen if all of a sudden 8 or 10 gigawatts of electricity just went off the grid because they went behind what's called behind the meter. The solution for that was we don't want to outlaw that, because in some times that can be an acceptable thing. But what we've done is put in a reliability review process that has to be done in 180 days by ERCOT and the PUC. And so if it's a company that owns a generation facility and they want to do a deal and go off the grid or behind the meter, that they have to go through a reliability review that'll be approved automatically in 180 days. if the PUC and ERCOT hadn't made a decision. And it's just to make sure that we can take that they can take that off, or maybe they can take it off with certain conditions, such as maybe when we really need the power, they can come temporarily back online, things of that nature. So a reliability review. We also, SB 6 encourages and incentivizes flexible load. That's just for these large loads to be able to work with us, as many already do, factories and such things. And when we really need electricity, they can turn off, go on backup generation, which we have incentives for that as well, go on backup generation so that they can go off for a few hours on those really hot nights or really cold mornings when we're short on electricity, and then they can come back on as soon as the emergency has passed. And the last thing the bill tries to do is deal with cost allocation. Right now, the way the cost allocation system, you want whoever causes the cost on the grid to be the one that pays for it, right? And the way it's working today off the system that was designed in 1999 before all the technology changes and everything else, that system is really pushing a lot of costs directly down to small businesses and homes, and they're not being borne by the people that are really causing them. And so SB 6 puts into place some practices, and it'll be through rulemakings and things of the PUC, but it'll put in place some practices that make sure that we're assigning costs to the person that is to the company or the entity that's actually creating those costs, so that they just don't get pushed down to our hometown consumers. And I will tell you that all in all, I think we've had very favorable reviews from industry. Obviously, everybody didn't get everything they wanted, but I think this is a very, very reasonable step. We can go into whatever detail on it you wish. I do have a cleanup floor amendment, and that's really all it is. But I think we've got a very reasonable step. I think we'll be the first ones in the country to take a step such as this. And I will tell you this, I read some articles today that said this would discourage data centers from coming to Texas. Let me tell you, it is absolutely the opposite. If you do not do this, data centers will not be able to come to Texas. We want them here. We want the large chip plants. We want the large factories. We want the heavy, high-end technology. And this makes sure that we can do it and keep reliability high and our electricity prices low. And with that, I would move to suspend the regular order of business.
Senator Schwartner, for what purpose?
Ask questions of the author, please.
Do you yield, Senator King?
Oh, certainly.
You recognize Senator Schwartner.
Senator King, first I want to thank you personally. I know how hard you have worked on this issue, the entire interim, as other members of the Business and Commerce Committee have worked, and our staffs, our corresponding staffs. This is not an easy bill. I call this bill the Texas booming bill, because it's a good problem.
I like that.
This is a bill, members, that is complex, but the genesis of it is the booming economy in Texas. It's not an oil boom, it's an economic boom led by big technology and their corresponding need for big electricity. That's the genesis of why this bill is necessary. And as you said, Senator, if you could repeat, what was the amount of electricity forecasts that we heard just last year, the revised forecasts of the demand over the next, I guess it's till 2030, that we'd need?
Sure, when we left 2 years ago, they said the most we would ever use is 86 gigawatts, and we would probably be using about 110 by 2029. We came back 7 months later, and they said, well, you're going to have to be prepared not for 110 gigawatts, but 150, and now the recent reports out are beyond that.
Right. So 86 to 150, and there's some question marks there about really is that 150 true or not? And so one part of this bill is load forecasting and getting a better grasp so that we as a state can plan for that load and understand what is truly coming at us as a state, as policyholders, as policymakers. The other thing is that this bill speaks to is this aspect of who should pay. And I think you mentioned the word cost allocation, but can you explain regarding transmission? Historically, it was paid by a certain type of methodology, and this bill speaks to how we should revise that methodology. And if you'd just give us some further insight as to how that transmission, that new transmission, is going to be addressed by changes in this bill if it becomes law?
Certainly. So the public, so ERCOT assigns the costs to the utilities based on what's called 4CP. And that was set up in SB 7 in 1999, and there's been a lot of changes since then. And what it does is it takes in 4 15-minute increment snapshots once a year. So there's 4 snapshots that are taken for 15-minute periods once a year, and based on that, they allocate, they have assumptions that determine how much they believe a particular utility has used in electric power, and therefore how much they have to pay for their share of the grid. The problem is it's become really easy to skirt. And so what they've gotten very good at doing, in fact, I know of one person told me they went into one utility where they managed it. They had an entire room that was set up, and they were trying to predict when those 4 15-minute periods a year would be, so they could turn their system off for those 15 minutes. And if they did that, then they didn't get allocated any charges. And there's nothing illegal or wrong with doing that. It was good business, but it made the rest of the public, you and me and Grandma and everybody else, pay for that, for the cost that it took to build a grid to provide that electricity. And so this will go to the PUC is directed to go to a much broader system. They'll be doing a rulemaking to do that, and it will be much more thorough, and it will address the new technologies where they can turn on and off and all that. The other thing is if you're installing a large load and you're going to go behind the meter, you're going to be off grid, there's no way you get charged for that, even though that at times you will be connected to the grid. Well, you should be paying for those times you will be connected. So we're creating what's kind of like an impact fee. And Senator Menendez, it's just like if a housing development's opening up in San Antonio, the city looks at that development, and it's going to have X amount of cost on the water and wastewater system, and so they pay a one-time impact fee per lot, and it'll be the same thing. If they're coming in behind the meter, they will pay a one-time impact fee that'll be assessed through ERCOT and the PUC to cover those initial costs and impact of providing grid services.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. The bottom line is we're trying to make sure that there's some equity when it comes to new costs, and that ratepayers that are residential and small businesses are not overburdened relative to the costs that are being generated by large load.
That's exactly correct. We want to make sure that all the cost is getting assigned to who causes it, because otherwise, at the end of the day, it gets passed down to the residential consumers.
And then the final thing that you've touched on several times was this large load co-locating with generation. The bill, I think, very artfully under your leadership and author, addresses how we as a state can be assured of the reliability of the grid through a reliability test that you authored and put in, and I completely support. But again, I want to just thank you and the members of the B&C committee. This bill is a good problem. This is a Texas is booming bill. It's a necessary refinement of some of the processes that are in place, and one I look forward to seeing become law in June. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And you've sat in on so many meetings with us and work groups and everything else, and I really appreciate your leadership on the committee on this bill.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. Questions of the author?
Do you yield, Senator King?
Certainly.
You recognize Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator King. Appreciate your hard work on this complex issue. In committee, we talked a little bit about a few of the questions that I just want to make sure we have for the record. ERCOT's ability to direct the utility to deploy the customer's on-site backup generating facility or curtail the load. Does this direction mean the utility will be responsible for curtailing the load? And if so, do they give a time frame for reasonable notice? And the reason I bring it up is that we've had some manufacturers, and you and I have had the conversation that, every it takes them a while to turn things down and off, and they can't just do it immediately, so they need some reasonable notices. So those are one of the questions that are important to us.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So we have in place today demand response programs, and a lot of large loads, petrochemical plants and others participate in it, and they're actually paid to do that. If they will go offline when we need their electricity,
Right.
they may be going on their own backup generation or just going off for a while. Some places can't do that, like chip plants. They can't go offline; they would have to go on backup. The bill creates an incentive program where large loads can be paid to do that if they want to participate in a demand response program. It'll be designed specifically for the type of large loads we're talking about here. But the way it works today, and the reason this is an improvement by far, the way it works today is if we start running out of electricity, ERCOT notifies the different utilities, you have to shed a certain amount of load. And so they may tell CPS in San Antonio, you've got to shed 1,000 megawatts of load. And CPS just goes out and turns off lines. And that will affect homes like we saw in Uri, and it can affect businesses. That we never want that to happen.
Right.
Having a voluntary program like we're creating here, particularly for these data centers, that will encourage and even pay them to be available to go offline for a few hours at a time. Most of them are building temporary backup generation anyway that they can turn on in an emergency.
Right.
And so we'll be incentivizing them to do that. They don't have to participate in it, but if they do, they will be guaranteed 24 hours notice. Guaranteed 24 hours notice that risk is there.
Well, that's definitely helpful for them to know and to know so they can plan also. I mean, data centers, like you mentioned earlier, it's a bunch of racks for computers, that sort of thing. It's one thing. Toyota manufacturing is a whole nother thing where you've got 24-hour crews coming in and giving that 24-hour notice, you can ask people to stay home. They don't have to risk coming in, and you can plan better.
Right, and just if we don't do this right, we will someday again have what we had during Uri, where you had large loads online in a city, and next door you had communities that were dark,
Yep.
and people literally died in their homes, froze to death. That can never happen again. And the industry doesn't want that to happen again. So these flexible load programs, having backup generation, doing better forecasting, all of these things are going to go to make sure that risk is spread, but we're never going to have a neighborhood go dark again when a warehouse next to it is lit.
Couldn't agree with you more. I completely agree. But by the same token, we also know that if we're trying to attract employers and big companies and
We got to protect them.
that they have to have certainty that they're going to have power, and that we're not going to have electric companies turning them off.
And that's right. That's why it's going to be a voluntary program.
Yeah.
We're going to incentivize them and actually pay them in many cases to have backup generation available. And most of the time, as you know, when San Antonio gets to 110 degrees 4 days in a row, there's like a 3-hour window there. Yep. And those voluntaries, they'll just turn off, go on their backup generation, most of which theirs will be diesel or natural gas. They'll go offline for a few hours, and by 10 o'clock at night, everything's fine again, and they can just switch off their backup, come right back on, and actually get compensated in many cases for doing that.
That all makes sense. In the bill, it talks about an electric cooperative, electric utility, or municipally owned utility may withhold consent. And I know that we want to make sure that retaining consent's very good, but the concern is that it could invite a power generation company to construct an on-site power plant to serve a large load behind the meter. And as we talked about behind the meter, one of the concerns that I have is if they do that, transmission lines were paid by all of us. And my concern is that if you allow them to put everything behind the meter, that they may not be sharing in the cost. And so I want to see what your thoughts are on the consent by the utility, whether or not to allow them. I mean, because under your section, they can seek to do so, but they have to get approval from the PUC. I guess that's the check and the balance.
Yeah, so if a generator is going to go completely off grid, go behind the meter, they would first have to go through a ERCOT PUC approval process. It's a reliability check. And if they don't rule in 180 days, it's automatically approved. And if they can approve it directly, or they can say, hey, we'll approve it if you're willing to be flexible and come back on in certain emergencies, put some other conditions on it, and the conditions can be temporary.
Very good. And I think one of the most important parts that I think about planning for these large loads is that we could do the inartful way of just saying, build more generation, and we, to heck with who pays for it, we'll just, subsidize the cost amongst all the ratepayers. But what your bill tries to do artfully is say, how do we reduce the cost to the everyday consumer and let the large loads pay for the costs that they bring to the table? And I think that's one of the big issues that many of us have.
Yeah, one of the beauties of the data centers is that they're going to be using a lot of electricity, like at peaker plants and things like that sits idle now. We want those running all the time,
right,
because that sends good price signals to the market for people to come in and build new generation.
Right, and that's the issue that we've had, that we can't force people to bring. I mean, we tried to incentivize them, and you can't force new generation. And we're dealing with the balance of the renewable power. We're like on a day like today that's been sunny. You got a lot of cheap energy out there. So it's hard to say, how do I build a new power plant when I'm competing against free inputs on renewables? And so I see the difficulty to attract them. But the important part is not to add any more socialized cost onto the ratepayers who can least afford it. So I appreciate that the most. We need to have a reliable, dependable electric grid to bring more business, but at the end of the day, not forget that it is our constituents who will be paying a lot of the freight. So thank you for answering my questions, and thank you for your hard work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, Senator King moves suspension of the regular order of business. Committee substitute Senate Bill 6. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Committee substitute Senate Bill 6. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 6 relating to electricity planning and infrastructure costs for large loads.
Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 1 by King.
Senator King on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I can go into whatever detail you'd like, but this really is just a cleanup and a clarification. A couple places the PUC said, can you put a comma here? Literally, some things like that. Would move adoption.
Members, Senator King moves adoption of floor amendment number 1. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, floor amendment number 1 is adopted. Senator King, you're recognized for a motion.
Move passage to engrossment.
Members, Senator King moves passage to engrossment. Is there objection? Hearing none, the bill is passed to engrossment. Senator King, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So move.
Members, Senator King moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
There being 31 ayes and no nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Committee substitute Senate Bill 6. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 6 relating to electricity planning and infrastructure costs for large loads.
Senator King, you're recognized for a motion.
Move final passage.
Members, Senator King moves final passage. Committee substitute Senate Bill 6. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell,
There being
Blanco.
31 ayes and no nays, the bill is finally passed. Congratulations, Senator King.
Thank you, members.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose? Oh, okay, okay. Okay. You ready? Senator King, you recognize for a motion to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 388.
Thank you, members. This is kind of part two, mini of the last bill. In 1999, during deregulation, the legislature put into place a statute that required that 50% of all new power generation built in ERCOT be made from natural gas, gas-fired. It was put into statute, but they excluded renewables from the 50% calculation since they were in their infancy. I think there was only like 300 megawatts online installed at that time. The PUC then built out rules around this that created a credit trading program that would be implemented if we ever fell below that 50% threshold. That credit program has never been triggered, although it's been in place, because we have always met the natural gas goals because we didn't count renewables in the calculation. Senate Bill 388 simply updates this existing statute and changes our natural gas goals of 50% to dispatchable goals of 50% for new generation, making it technology agnostic. We will also now include renewables when determining if the new generation system-wide meets this 50% goal. Batteries are not included as dispatchable, though they often are, but they are not for this purpose because it's going to be a credit program, and we really couldn't figure out how to apply the credits under the existing PUC program to things that may only run for 1 or 2 hours at a time instead of for 24/7. SB 388 will incentivize nuclear generation by giving double credits to nuclear generation facilities. The first snapshot of this will be in 2026. So the legislature will have plenty of time. We come back in 2027 to see if this needs tweaking. But basically, the objective of this is it creates a credit program to make sure that at least 50% of the new generation being built beginning in 2026 will be dispatchable. And the reason we're doing that is because if you look at the construction queue, with the exception of what was built by the legislature or is being built or incentivized by the legislature through the Texas Energy Fund from last session, with the exception of that, almost everything is renewables. And there's a place for renewables. We want renewables. We want wind and solar, but you can't have it as your base load. And I haven't looked in a while, but the last time I looked, there was like 35 gigawatts of renewable in the construction queue and a -8 of dispatchable in the construction queue. And so this is designed to incentivize building dispatchable electricity and make sure that going forward, we're doing at least 50% dispatchable, and then the other 50% can be renewable. And with that, I move to suspend the regular order of business.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Questions of the author, Mr.
Do you
President?
yield, Senator King? Senator King, do you yield?
Certainly.
You're recognized, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator King. I think one of the questions you just answered it, apparently I think you have an amendment, or does the bill already say that the battery will not be considered as dispatchable?
It already says that, but there was some clarification that was needed on batteries, so it just clarifies.
Okay, and so you had I think in your bill layout, you said that batteries could only be considered for 1 or 2 hours?
2 hours is kind of normal. Some of them are getting up toward 4, but the credit program that currently exists at the PUC is based on total megawatts, and it's really based on a 24/7 megawatt provision and our total megawatts over the year. And it was just really hard to figure out how you plug batteries into that. Now, batteries 2 years from now, we could come in and go, hey, it'll work and you can plug them in. But right now, we couldn't figure out how to do that. They were in it at first, but it just got too complex.
Got it. Does the 55% dispatchable threshold apply to a utility's current generation portfolio or only new projects?
New projects. There'll be a snapshot at 2026, the end of 2026, the PUC will look and see how many megawatts of dispatchable and how many megawatts of intermittent were generated. If we're short, And by the way, if it was a snapshot today, we actually wouldn't be short. But if we were short, then a renewable company, if they built 500 megawatts, then they're going to have to go buy 500 credits, and they'll buy it from a dispatchable. And that will incentivize more dispatchable financially, help overcome the subsidy that they now get for renewables for the federal government. You know, you always get more what you subsidize, less what you tax. And right now, everybody's building renewable because they have this guaranteed federal subsidy.
Okay. Would the dispatchable generation credit purchases contemplated in this bill come at a cost to ratepayers of municipal utilities if the municipal utility were forced to pay them? In our example would be the San Antonio ratepayer, 950,000 individual ratepayers, because CPS Energy would be forced to pay them. How do you envision that?
So any company, let's just say company A, doesn't matter who it is, let's say they built 500 megawatts of wind in 2026. And let's say company B built 1,000 megawatts of dispatchable natural gas. Then the dispatchable company has 1,000 dispatchable credits that they can sell if anybody needs them. The wind company is going to have to go purchase 500 credits from a dispatchable company. Now, what I believe will ultimately happen with this is you're going to see the renewable guys and the gas guys and the nuclear guys get together and do deals together. And that's really what we're pushing for in this. But right now there is such a strong federal subsidy coming in that there is a tremendous disincentive to build dispatchable electricity. And so we're trying to create an incentive that will not pass down to homeowners and small business.
Oh, that makes sense. I have a concern, you know, that you mentioned in your bill layout that it was agnostic as to generation, but it feels as if it's agnostic as to generation as long as it's not renewable because of the dispatchability. But the last thing I was going to ask you was, so the concern that the bill is trying to address is that we don't have enough dispatchable energy, so the reliability is not where you'd like it to be. That's the concern, I'm assuming?
Well, there's not enough dispatchable being built to build the level of reliability and low-cost energy that we need.
Very good. All right. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, Senator King moves suspension of the regular order of business on Committee Substitute Senate Bill 388. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
Being 19 ayes and 12 nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lies out on second reading, Committee Substitute Senate Bill 388. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 388 relating to the legislature's goals for electric generation capacity in this state.
Members, the following amendment.
Floor Amendment Number 1 by King.
Senator King, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, as I mentioned, we took the original bill, had batteries in it as dispatchable. We removed those, but we didn't get all the language in that we needed. This amendment simply puts in all the language to clarify that batteries are not a part of that. It also makes sure that batteries understand that they don't have to buy credits. So it clarifies that batteries do not have to buy credits. With that, move adoption.
Members, Senator King moves adoption. Floor Amendment Number 1. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, Floor Amendment Number 1 is adopted. Senator King, you're recognized for a motion.
Move passage to engrossment.
Okay, what do you? Oh, okay. Members, Senator King moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
There being 18 ayes and 13 nays, The bill is passed to engrossment. We'll hold there, Senator King.
Thank you, members.
Senator Betancourt, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider Senate Bill 15.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Senate Bill 15 is a bill that will allow us to positively impact the housing affordability issue in the state of Texas. One of the most significant costs in construction of new residential housing stock is the price of land. That may actually add up to a quarter of the sale price of any single family home. Land is obviously a finite resource. Some cities in Texas contribute to affordable housing stock to the lack of affordable housing stock by having higher than necessary minimum residential lot standards. These very large minimum lot standards inhibit development of certain types of housing in areas where they could be otherwise developed. We really can't wait to do anything about housing affordability anymore. This is the first of about 5 major bills that's coming through the process. This bill, Senate 15, Senator Middleton has a bill. We'll have Senator Hughes as well as Senator Flores and other bills coming through. And the crisis can be basically summarized in one statistic. The average age of a home buyer in Texas is now 54 years old. And that is simply a classification of home buyers that is not going to be able to be sustained nor help first-time home buyers make the major purchase of a home their priority. So Senate Bill 15 seeks to alleviate these problems in our state's fast-growing economies by prohibiting municipalities from requiring residential lots to be larger than 1,400 feet, for density regulations to require density less than 31.1 units an acre. These minimum lot standards were and do mirror the city of Houston's minimum lot sizes, and SB 15 includes provisions of the bill not to be construed to affect requirements related to revision or sewer water service, or that there would be no effect on deed restrictions imposed by HOA or private agreements. We do have some incentives for small lots for 4,000 square feet or smaller. This would keep unnecessary regulation from setbacks or types of building restrictions like height requirements, bulk requirements, inhibiting housing costs. So the key provision of Senate Bill 15, it only applies to private plots of land for 5 acres or larger that are currently not been mapped or platted, so this green space can be used in a more efficient manner. We're going to take a couple amendments at this point in time, one from Senator Parker on a bracket amendment to move it from 90,000 to 150,000 in population. And also Senator Menendez has one on the rechargeable area of the aquifer in San Antonio. So with that, Mr. President and members, I move suspension of the regular order of business to take up and consider Senate Bill 15.
Senator Schwartner, for what purpose?
To ask the questions of the author, please.
Do you yield, Senator Betancourt?
Certainly.
You recognize Senator Schwartner.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Betancourt. We've had some discussions about certain provisions of this legislation. I just wanted to understand more fully and get it out in the air regarding some specific concerns that have been brought to me by various individuals, including municipal leaders in my district. First, I guess and foremost, your bill attempts to address the issue of housing affordability by kind of raining down, I guess, on municipal rules that are disadvantaging the building of smaller homes, residential homes.
Well, let's
I have
look
the
at-
general premise.
Yeah, let's look at it as a glass half full. What we're trying to do is take 5-acre lots that are greenfield and, should we say, more efficiently use those, because that's really where this bill starts.
And these 5-acre lots, this only pertains to future development, right?
Right, it only pertains to future
And
development.
my understanding is the population with the amendment coming up would be 90,000, going up to 150,000.
That is correct.
Okay. The idea is the diminished or the more denser lot size would hopefully improve overall affordability of housing in the grand scheme of things.
Right, because in the future, when you look at average for a starter home, the cost of land is 1/4 of that cost. So we think that this will help out dramatically for, especially in the urban areas we're talking about, because at 150,000, we're really talking about the urban areas in the state.
Right. You're not concerned that there has been concerns brought to me that it would just be more dense and more highly priced versus actually more affordable. Is that an argument you don't really subscribe to in any way?
No, I think they've got the argument backwards, because without more supply and without a lower cost of land, there's no way to make things more affordable. So we're really recognizing the obvious here, that we're having to take the available green space land that we've got and try to use it more efficiently to lower cost. The problem, and Senator Schwartner, you know this, I mean, when you look around, especially your area, homes are probably closer to $700,000 for starter homes. And we really need to be looking at cost structures that are half of that.
Thank you, Senator. The density that is proposed under this bill that would be allowed would be up to 31.1 units per acre. And according to my calculations, 1 acre is like 43,560 feet.
That's true.
Divided by 1,400 square feet per lot, that equals 31.1. So that's up to 31 units per acre, 31 homes per acre.
Right.
That's pretty dense, you would agree?
Well, but actually when you look at density, when you look out here and look at the condo towers that we're seeing, those densities are far exceeded. We actually had debates on density back in Houston as far back as 25 years ago, where we were looking at dwelling unit densities of 24, 26 per acre. So it recognizes a fundamental fact that we only have so much green space left in the major urban areas. And so to be able to get, hopefully, condo and other prices where folks can afford them, we're going to have a higher density.
Right. And that higher density comes with potentially some problems. Traffic and EMS services and public safety and parking all come to mind when you have 31 homes per acre or that type of density, proportional density. Has there been an impact study or any sort of discussion about traffic, parking, and EMS services?
We had a lot of very positive discussion with the builders and the other major entities that were there. Remember, these are minimum standards, and the builders can combine those 1,400 lots as necessary. That's effectively, one possible outcome of many possible permutations.
Right. The other concern I have was that there appears to be, at least on page 1, there is what I would call a carve out on line 46 through 49 of the bill, in which I'll read it. This subchapter does not apply to a 1 mile radius from the perimeter of a campus that includes a law enforcement training center in a county that has a population of 2.6 million or more, but less than 2.7, which would be Dallas County. And from my discussions, I believe that is around UNT Dallas, which has a large, I looked on the map, it has large areas of open space around it still.
Right, that's a project that's on our project list right now. It's funded at $30 million in the current budget. And that's for the police training academy that Lieutenant Governor has been promoting. And so that's to make sure that we don't override that project that we've already committed to, at least from the President of the Senate, and now at least with the Finance Committee.
What do you mean by override that project? I don't understand. If we have a dense populated residential, what does it do to the training center that is disadvantaging it?
Well, the training center is obviously going to be more sprawling, okay, because it's not designed to be a dense residential unit, so that area itself needs to be exempt so that it doesn't have a density dwelling per acre that the police academy won't be able to support.
So the exemptions in the bill that you believe should come off the floor would be a population in a municipality that is more than 150,000 once it's amended on the floor.
Right.
Or in a county that is wholly or partly located in a county with a population of more than 300,000, are in this 1 mile radius around this law enforcement training area in the county, Dallas County, essentially.
Right, that's correct.
Those are the three.
Well, no, there's
exemptions.
actually one more. We have a specific,
Who else are we exempting?
well, recharge of the actual aquifer zone. It's a small area. We've already mapped it out through the.
What aquifer?
Lieutenant Governor, what's that?
What aquifer are we
Oh,
exempting?
it's the main San Antonio aquifer. Sorry, name escapes me. What is it? Yeah, Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone. It's a small footprint in the San Antonio area that the water folks in both are the Senate and Lieutenant Governor's office, would agree that we don't have to have a high density footprint on that recharge zone.
Right. But other areas of the state that are outside those counties and outside those municipality bounds or that 1 mile radius or the aquifer zone can, in the bill's intent is to allow for high density residential building of up to 31 units per acre with frontal, the wider than 20 feet. So 20 feet is mainly from here, me to you. That'd be the
Right.
front,
But
that'd be
that's
the width of the front of the residence home,
But that's an or, so it's
Or.
wider than.
wider
And
than
it's
20 feet
deeper
or
than-
deeper than 60
Right.
feet or
And then-
larger than 114
And then
feet.
again, the developers can combine those lots as needed.
Would you say that's really essentially not allowing the municipalities to do any sort of zoning when it comes to residential in that case? I mean, it's such a small amount that they could actually put in place that it doesn't really affect any ability to kind of fashion the residential neighborhoods based upon zoning requirements, at least.
No, because those already exist and those neighborhoods are being left untouched.
Yes, these are new areas.
These
These are new
are the-
areas that are
you have to have-
5 acres or larger.
Yeah, you
right?
have to have
I'm
5
talking about
acres.
future developments.
Yeah, right. You have to have 5 acres of greenfield, and these are all future. So no, there's not going to be any retrograde activity.
Okay. All right. Sarah, I understand there's an affordability issue. I do have concerns that this maybe doesn't really hit the nail on the head when it comes to affordability, that we're just going to have really compactly urbanized, dense, but also highly appreciated and costly developments. But I might be wrong. I'm going to vote for this bill out of respect for the process. The concerns I raised are real to my heart regarding what we're doing, restraining municipal jurisdiction over the zoning that they have historically encouraged. There is carve-outs, some of which apply obviously to my municipalities, to my counties, but I still feel this bill might be a step too far, although I am willing to vote for it today out of respect to yourself and the others on the committee.
Well, and thanks, Senator Ford, because I hope you're willing to vote for it tomorrow.
and tomorrow. All right.
All right.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Hinojosa of Hidalgo, for what purpose?
Senator Betancourt yield for a couple of questions.
Will you yield, Senator Betancourt?
Thank you, Mr. President. And quite frankly, I couldn't ask
Senator
better
Hinojosa,
questions.
you're recognized.
I apologize, Mr. President. I couldn't ask better questions than Senator Schwarter, but I am really concerned about taking away zoning authority from cities, especially when they have military bases or they have industrial parks. How do we deal with that?
And Senator, let me make sure that there's not a misunderstanding. Whatever's zoned residential is still residential. Whatever's zoned commercial is still zoned commercial. Whatever's zoned industrial is still zoned industrial. What this does is just provide for a more compact use of that zoning that's already existing for residential. You would have the ability to take 5-acre lots that are currently greenfield. This doesn't go backward on existing subdivisions, and the developers would have more options to make a higher density and therefore a lower cost on a dwelling unit per acre. So fundamentally there's no change in in what's residential and what's commercial at this point. That's all left up to the local folks.
So a developer, for example, could have lots that are bigger than the ones Senate Bill 15 restricts the city to. In other words, a developer could have larger lots that are restricted in your Senate Bill 15?
If the developer is able to combine them, on an advantage. In fact, we talk about 4,000 square foot lots here to be able to look at those as a way to incentivize developers to use the smaller lot sizes, and so basically this is patterned on the methodology of trying to get minimum lot sizes down to where that you actually have housing affordability.
But they wouldn't be required to do that.
Right, this will be the minimum lot size that will be set up, okay? But the language is designed to be, it can be 20 feet or more, or 60 feet or more. So that's how there gives some initial flexibility in those lot sizes. And then it's really up to the developers to be able to combine them if necessary for a project that they would have. Remember, these are 5-acre greenfield lots that exist right now.
So if I am a developer and I own, let's say, 20 acres, I'm required to build lots. Can I build lots bigger than the lots under Senate Bill 15?
So you would have those lots determined, and then you could combine them, as a private developer. But for example, you could, by this legislation, you could have 4 5-acre lots. Okay, if you wish to go through that process and then go through that subdivision. But again, the whole purpose is to generate more density to get less land costs so that we have a shot at people being able to buy a home, or buy a condominium or buy something that they can afford, somewhere near close to the $335,000 cost that we've got for the average home in the state.
Condominiums, down in the Rio Grande Valley, we have 1-acre lots are being sold. We have plenty of land north of McAllen. They have 5-acre lots. Will Senate Bill 15 restrict the sale of those type of lots?
Okay, no, because, this is the subtlety. The government has the restriction, but the developer has the ability to amalgamate any of this together in a format that they can use and sell. So again, we're trying to say to government, this is the smaller lot sizes, but we're leaving it to the developer to combine it as they can to get the better density that we need, quite frankly, for the growth that the state is coming. And we're already here. So there's some subtlety here, but we're trying to get government to keep to the smallest number that they can and let the marketplace try to combine these as necessary to build the housing stock that we need.
Well, I just think I do have a lot of concerns, many of the same expressed by Senator Schwartner, in that we're trying to pack 31 homes into 1 acre within the city limits of a city. It creates other challenges for the city in terms of police protection, in terms of ambulance service, in terms of providing the infrastructure. It's a real problem.
Well, Senator, I've used the same comment I used, Senator Schwartner. We're going to make some changes because we've got such an affordable housing problem. When the average age of a first-time buyer is 54 years old, that means that they're looking at using their already accumulated wealth to buy a home. And you're going to see a series of these bills that will change what we've been doing. But again, this is a technique of keeping the lot sizes low, but letting the market combine them as necessary to provide the housing stock that we need.
See, the Naval Air Station in my Senate district in Nueces County, they're very much concerned about the density that's right on the flight zone. If there was, God forbid, there were ever an accident and one of those planes crashes right into a very dense population in their danger zone. Those are issues that we need to address.
You can look at a whole bunch of possible permutations.
Yes,
okay?
But they're real.
And of course, we saw the plane crash outside of Philadelphia. That's just, however, the only way to get housing affordability is to build our way out of the scarcity. That's it. because it's what scarcity is driving this price. And Senator, even in your area, the housing costs have dramatically increased because of the cost of inflation. And we're going to have some other bills coming that will be, be looking at manufactured housing, because it's about half the cost of regular housing. We're going to be looking at any technique we can that can help affordability long term. And this is part of what we have to manage. We just don't have any choice to do nothing and use the existing lot sizes. Means that we're just going to be constantly going the other direction on housing affordability. So I think it recognizes the obvious, but again, it leaves it up to the developers. Remember, the developers right now own that 5-acre lot. And all we're saying is cities, you can carve it up, but you need to have a smaller lot size and then let the marketplace determine where to go from there.
Let me point out that the price of homes is increasing, but it's not just because of the size of lots.
Oh, I agree.
You have inflation, the cost of materials going up. In addition to that, you have private equity coming in, buying 30% of the homes down in McAllen, and then increasing the prices for them. So there's a lot of factors involved other than just the size of lots.
Right, and we're going to have about 6 major bills come through, and we're going to do our best to look at this. The first obvious place you look for is land cost. And then, but you're right, it's a very complex problem. But I tell you, when we just saw the latest results of how old the average buyer is, we're going to try to fire every 6 gun that we've got at this problem, but we're going to do it in a rifle, and with one bullet at a time, so everybody can debate it like we've done here today.
Well, I know back in my Senate district, there are very much serious concerns about this bill. And I know you're trying to do the right thing, but I think there has a lot of unforeseen consequences that will cause more problems than try to solve.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's going to help with one problem that we need to, and the other side is growth, and then we're going to have to help everybody manage that, no matter what we do, because growth is inevitable unless we're going to go into an economic tailspin, and of course nobody wants that. Anyway, but we'll be monitoring this, we'll be reporting it, we'll be giving you all the data that I've got on this as this bill actually gets implemented.
And high interest rates.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Bendico,
No,
for
thank
answering
you,
my questions.
Senator Hinojosa.
Senator Perry, for what purpose?
Question for the author.
You yield, Senator Betancourt.
Yes.
You recognize Senator Perry.
Not to rehash some of the conversation, just is from a very slow, simple-minded individual.
Oh, yeah.
The average home in my area for a single resident home, the lot size a quarter of an acre, that gets you about a 1,600, 2,000 square foot home. Give me the profile of what a 31 volume on a full acre looks like in your thoughts, in your vision. What is, and I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, but I can't get my head around, and to your conversation, for $335,000 in my area, you can get a 2,000 square foot home,
right.
Brand new, 2 cars, decent backyard for the kids to play in. So I understand urban is different than that, but give me, from your vision, what one of 31 homes would be in your mind on a whole acre.
Well, as a priority bill, Lieutenant Governor,
yes.
Here's what we're trying to do. You take that $1,400 square foot, and in an urban area, you can easily be looking at $100 a foot, okay? So if you can hold your land cost to $100.
I get the theory. I just can't get my head around how you squeeze 31 homes into an acre. So is this probably on average a 600 square foot home, 700?
Well, let me go through that, because this is actually the minimum lot size that the city of Houston has used for 100 years, okay? So if you have that type of lot size, if the developer chooses to use that, okay, then you could either combine those 1,400s to a 2,800 or a 4,200, et cetera, because remember, these are greenfield existing 5-acre lots or more, okay? So what we're trying to do is get government out of the way of telling the developer what to do with the options that are available, and then let the developer take those minimum lot sizes and combine them as necessary.
So as a developer, back in my early years, I had 80 homes put on 20 acres.
Okay.
nice homes, but just single-family residents. And at the time, it's been a few years back, but I just know how compressed that gets pretty quickly. What I'm trying to get to is, and I'm not opposed to it. If you tell me it's a tiny home, Perry, then okay, if people want to buy tiny homes. I guess what I'm hearing you say is currently the city does not allow that process.
Well,
so you're saying it would be a developer's option going forward?
Well, it would be a developer option to do it. And remember, if you're looking at a townhome, okay, if you had 1,400 square feet of actual ground, yeah, you could build a dwelling, per acre. Certainly you could build up, because there's another advantage
You
of
can
this.
build up.
You can build up. Now, see, because we're only talking about a one-dimensional surface, but actually these are three-dimensional problems. So again, it's an option to keep get density up higher in the urban areas, because we're really talking about, we had 33 cities on it. We're now probably, we're less than half of that number. So it's only the very few top cities that we're talking about now.
Well, I'm with Chairman Swertner, and it's because my world doesn't look like that.
I know.
And I guess as long as you're not forcing that conversation, but it's still a developer's option. If the market says people want to live in 300 square foot homes, I'm okay with that.
Right.
But I think the other issues around EMSs, and I'll give you an example. Even in Lubbock, Texas, we had a development. These were $1 million homes. They're really cool design, community park, The streets are so narrow that if there's a fire, you're a 50-50. So
I hope we're better than 50-50 if there's a fire.
I do think that, to Senator Hinojosa's point, it's interesting. A lot of the generation coming up don't want to be homeowners. So there is that element that they don't want the responsibility. They like the idea that they can rent today and be gone tomorrow and no responsibility for the property as they leave. So there's that element going. The cost of materials, the cost of property has been unaffordable. I get that. But as long as you're not changing my world or around the state's world, that you're going to force this conversation into being, because I promise you, nobody's going to live in those homes in my area.
No, and Senator Perry, but that's the beauty of this, because you have the 5-acre lots that exist, and then you let the private sector decide how to actually allocate it. And you're right, there's going to be a big difference between what a successful development is in Lubbock versus one which is...
And you're not changing Lubbock. Am I hearing you correctly?
Right,
You're not changing
that's right. And so I'm just, and by the way, since I visited you, I know there's actually no traffic on the freeways.
I would tell you this way. I've talked to my wife a lot. Why don't we just downsize to a tiny home out in the middle of the field? She's not there yet, so just leave it alone.
And one high-density high-rise is not going to change the lack of traffic on your highway.
I don't know how that works. You've threw out the vision. When it works and get 31 homes on an acre that people don't hear everything that's going home next door,
sure,
then just call them an apartment then and put them together. But I will go forward and see where this lands at the end of the day.
Thank you. And you'll make sure they have water. That's right.
Member Senator Betancourt moves suspension of the regular order of business. Senate Bill 1-5. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
Being 27 ayes and 4 nays, the rule suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 15. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 15, relating to size and density requirements for residential lots in certain municipalities.
Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
For amendment number 1 by Parker.
Senator Parker on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this amendment simply adjusts this subchapter applicability to municipalities with a population of more than 150,000. I believe it's acceptable to the author, and I move adoption.
Senator Betancourt on the amendment.
Amendment is acceptable to the author.
Members, Senator Parker has moved adoption of floor amendment number 1 is acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, floor amendment number 1 is adopted. Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
For amendment number 2 by Menendez.
Senator Menendez on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Betancourt. This amendment simply states that the municipality can do things over the aquifer recharge zone. And in Bexar County, the recharge zone is very important to us as that's where the water permeates into the aquifer, and we do take great care to protect it. And so I appreciate Senator Bettencourt working with us on that. Thank you very much. I think it's acceptable to the author.
Senator Bettencourt on the amendment.
The amendment is acceptable to the author.
Move adoption.
Senator Schwartner, for what purpose?
Ask questions of the author of the amendment.
Please.
Do you yield, Senator Menendez?
Absolutely, 100%. Go
Senator
right ahead.
Menendez, do you yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator Schwartner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, I understand why you're trying to get exemptions. Just so I understand fully, the municipality may adopt or enforce an ordinance, rule, or other measure that applies to land located in an aquifer recharge zone and relates to the protection of an aquifer. Would this be applicable to the entire county of Bexar County or
No, not
San
at all.
Antonio? No.
So the aquifer recharge zone is a very specific area. Chairman Perry can tell us where in Bexar County, and most of it's the northern part of the county, in that area where this bill affects us is the permeable. We currently have an ordinance that says newly developed properties have to be below the 70% of impermeable cover. Because it is where aquifers are recharged. The other thing we do is we don't allow for oil change. You can't do an oil change or gas stations right over the aquifer recharge. And so that's...
So you all only allow for 30% impervious cover currently in these recharge zones?
In the recharge zone, we do not allow for 30% impervious cover. I mean...
You said, well, 70% permeable.
Well, they have to be below
30%
the... Yeah, so 30% is
impermeable.
acceptable. Yes.
Yeah, so you could concrete 30% of a...
Correct. That is correct, yes.
So, okay. So you're concerned about just highly compact, dense dwellings stacked on top of one another and what they might do from an aquifer standpoint.
Well, the concrete covering over where the water permeates into the aquifer is the biggest concern for us. Concrete, asphalt, anything that stops the water from going into the recharge zone.
Okay. So right now in that area is, again, you have to have a 70% permeability, or 30. You're only allowed to build on 30% of that land that you own, for instance.
Correct, and this is a restriction that's been done in conjunction with the business community and the San Antonio community. A lot of this is some of the most popular parts of our county, Stone Oak, Sonterra, all of this northern section where the Edwards Aquifer. We saw that there was so much development, we had to do this in order to maintain permeability.
Those are nice neighborhoods, I think.
Very nice neighborhoods.
Yeah, I've been around those a little bit. So, yeah, I'd like to see a map of it. I was an aside, but I appreciate your amendment and what you're trying to do to protect those regions and the aquifer. So I'm not fighting it. I just wanted to get clarification. Thank you,
I understand
Senator.
completely, and they also have apartment complexes as well, but we have to just be careful, make sure we don't cover it over the whole recharge. And so, thank you for your questions, and move adoption.
Senator Bettencourt, is the amendment acceptable?
The amendment is acceptable to the author, and I actually may have an answer for Senator Schwartner. Yes, Senator, I have the maps here on my phone. I'll text them to you. All right?
Members, Senator Menendez moves adoption of floor amendment number 1 is acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, floor amendment number 2 is adopted. Senator Bettencourt, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move passage of Senate Bill 15 to engrossment.
Members, Senator Bettencourt moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
There being 28 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is passed to engrossment. Senator Bettencourt, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved, Mr. President.
Members, Senator Bettencourt moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Birdwell,
Being
Blanco.
28 ayes and 3 nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill 15. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 15 relating to size and density requirements for residential lots in certain municipalities.
Senator Bettencourt, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage of Senate Bill 15.
Members, Senator Bettencourt moves final passage Senate Bill 15. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt,
Being
Birdwell.
28 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is finally passed. Congratulations, Senator Bettencourt.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. We'll have more from housing affordability in the next few weeks.
Senator Colcourse, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 17.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Members, I know it's already been a long day, and so I will be quick and expeditious on a bill that we've seen before but has been improved. Many times we debate bills on this floor, and through the process, legislation is improved. And that is the case with this legislation, originally filed a session ago as Senate Bill 147. This bill is different, better, more constitutionally sound, and predicated on national security issues to protect our land, food sources, natural resources like oil and gas, timber, and maybe our most precious of all resources, Senator Perry, water. When Senate Bill 147 was originally filed, we worked to refine it and make it better, yet it failed to reach the governor's desk in 2023. To understand the urgency of this bill, since we left the 88th session, 22 states have enacted legislation, similar legislation, that regulate foreign ownership of land, according to the Congressional Research Service. Those 22 states are Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. When Senate Bill 147 failed to make it to Governor Abbott's desk 2 years ago, I asked during the interim that my staff collaborate and work with the best minds, research, and craft the most constitutional bill. I want to thank my general counsel, Grant McLaughlin, and I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor's staff and many legal minds. And of course, we worked very closely with General Paxton's Solicitor General in making a constitutional bill. More recently, we've worked with Governor Abbott's lawyers, and some of those have even clerked at the Supreme Court of the United States, and the result is a better bill that we have before us. I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Donna Campbell, and who was then Rep. Tan Parker, now Senator Parker, for Senate Bill 2116 in 2021 that protected our infrastructure from foreign ownership. That was called the Lone Star Infrastructure Protection Act, passed unanimously. Senator Campbell, what you did then protected us from 140,000 acres that had been amassed in South Texas next to Laughlin Air Force Base, a wind farm that was going to connect to the ERCOT grid, owned by a former general from China. So thank you for that. And Senator Parker, you were the House sponsor then, Representative Parker. We really appreciate that. So Senate Bill 17 builds off that bill and is better than 147. Members, you might remember in 2021, under Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the House passed in FY 2022 an agriculture appropriations bill that would have required the USDA to take actions to prohibit the purchase of agriculture land by companies owned in full or part by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Unfortunately, the Senate stripped that out. I will say that Senate Bill 17 provides a common sense guardrails to protect food, housing, energy, water, and national security, while at the same time it keeps alive the American dream of home ownership to all. Members, let me just give you a quick overview of what Senate Bill 17 does. It prohibits the purchase or acquisition of private property in Texas by certain individuals, organizations, or entities that are domiciled in a country identified by the U.S. Director of National Intelligence as a country that poses a risk to national security and is listed in the 3 most recent annual threat assessment report. Currently, since the Obama administration through the Trump administration, on to the Biden administration, those 4 countries have been consistent: Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. We did change the word from citizen to domicile, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that, because we've had some that say that has weakened the bill. Not at all. I think that it has made it stronger and constitutional, more constitutional. During the drafting of this legislation, my office sought the advice of General Paxton, Solicitor General, as I mentioned, based on case law, including a bill signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis. Some changes from SB 147 to SB 17 were suggested. And so no longer does it refer to citizens, but rather individuals domiciled in a designated country of those, the 4 that are listed currently. This important distinction helps to capture those who are closer to the controls of those hostile regimes. Senate Bill 17 makes clear that the prohibitions do not apply to U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, including dual citizens. Senate Bill 17 states that prohibited real estate holdings will not include a resident homestead owned by an individual, so as to address the concerns of those who have fled those regimes and claimed asylum in America and want to live the American dream. Senate Bill 17 clarifies the definition of real property as agricultural land and improvement located on agricultural land, commercial property, industrial property, groundwater, residential property, a mine or quarry, a mineral in place, standing timber, or water rights. This makes clear that Senate Bill 17 ensures food, energy, and national security. All of them are protected. Our national security is protected. Senate Bill 17 it specifically prohibits the acquiring of land and natural resources, but sellers, realtors, and title companies are not the ones who enforce the law. Rather, it is exclusively the Attorney General. SB 17 spells out the enforcement mechanisms for prohibited ownership of real property. The Attorney General is given authority to investigate potential violations if they have reasonable suspicion. The AG may bring an in rem action against real property in a district court where all or part of the real property is located and is subject to violation where it is located. If the district court finds that real property was in violation, a receiver will be appointed with the powers and duties of a receiver under Chapter 64 Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Members, the AG will go through that process using the MREM action, and specifically Senate Bill 17 has and spells out the individual or organization meeting the test to determine they have actual control of the entity's operations. This is a clarification from Senate Bill 147 that was simply a 51% test. The test looks at who is controlling the organization so as to ensure a straw buyer does not try to circumvent the prohibition in place. In closing, members, Texas leads the nation in the number of farms and ranches and in cattle, sheep, goat, and cotton production in the nation. Texas is home to 16 of the 17 rare earth materials. Texas is the top producer of oil and natural gas in the United States, as well as the top exporter. And Texas is also home to 15 active duty military installations with an economic impact of over $150 billion at those installations. Members, Senate Bill 17 is about ensuring that Texas's land and natural resources do not fall into the hands of an adversarial nation or their agents. And with that, Mr. President, I'd like to suspend the regular order of business.
Senator Perry, for what purpose?
Question to the author.
Do you yield, Senator Kolkhorst?
I do.
You recognize
Thank you.
Senator Perry.
Senator Kolkhorst, and it's a better bill than 147, and I applaud the energy that went into it. Obviously, you have the votes politically. I'm there with you. I still share concerns that we are giving up things to the government that we may rule the day and regret for some time, but I understand the adversaries we face, and they're real. I'm just not sure it's the landowner's obligation to solve that problem, but that argument's a different day. You state in your documents that title companies, bankers, whoever's involved in the transaction are not the target or will not be in the broad net that's cast on some level if a challenge is made. And I guess we've talked a little bit about, but as an AG goes in to investigate these particular issues, if they surface, what affirmative defense, what does a title company have to show that we questioned and we were told and we're good because that person lied to us? And I understand the realm, I'm not an attorney, but how do we make sure that we don't pull an innocent part of the transaction, and for that matter, the seller? You know, if the seller says, they told me they were domestic, they're not one of these groups, and we end up filing, how do you protect, how's that bill handled that situation where those are not going to be pursued by the AG?
Right, so how do you protect the seller and how do you protect the real estate agent?
The transfer agents, the transaction agents.
Right. So
brokers.
In looking at that through, chapter 64 of the Civil and Remedies Code, what would happen is that the Attorney General would go in and have to have a reasonable suspicion. And that's a standard used in criminal procedure. It's less than a probable cause, but more than a suspicion or hunch. It's a standard used for arrest and warrants. If they did that investigation and they brought suit against them, the in rem portion, which is very interesting, I mean, in Texas statute, we have in rem, it refers to a legal action or proceeding that is directed against a property rather than a person. So that's another protection there. We're going to actually sue the property. And you go through that, all through that proceeding, and what happens in the end is if you find that it meets all the hurdles in Senate Bill 17, then of course you will have a receiver that's appointed, and they'll go through that process, and they'll take that land, they'll sell it. We even spell out the senior lien holders, and we pay them off. And then in the end, if something's left over, we actually, and this is what separates us from other nations, we give the rest of the money back to the purchaser who, had it. So we're going to protect the bankers, and there will be no action against a person as we've restructured Senate Bill 17.
A person, an entity that's a transaction, i.e. title companies, they're insulated. 100%. You can't get there from here. Interesting what you just said. I was going to ask you what happens to the receivership proceeds. You're telling me you'll give it back to China.
Senior lien holder.
No, I get it. It clears the debts if there is debts.
Pays it all
and
off.
You're going to take the difference, that delta, and give it back to China.
We have to, they purchase it. That's what separates us from communistic countries, is the fact that that person came here, they bought the land, we're going to pay off all the lien holders, and then in the end, if there's any money left over, okay. I mean, this person came here, they bought the land, that company, we give it back to them. And I think that's what separates us from other countries. That wouldn't happen in other countries.
I'm good with that. So you answered my questions. The receivership, you answered it before I asked it. That's good. I'm going to be with you. I will tell you, this has some unintended consequences. I hope we don't have these situations even go through that hopefully never occur. But when they do, it won't be a good day for Texas landowners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, Senator Kolkhorst moves suspension of the regular order of business and committee substitute Senate Bill 17. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
There being 24 ayes and 7 nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lays that on second reading. Committee substitute Senate Bill 17. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 17 relating to the purchase or acquisition of real property by certain aliens or foreign entities.
Senator Kolkhorst, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage of Committee Substitute Senate Bill 17 to engrossment.
Members, Senator Kolkhorst moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell,
There being
Blanco.
24 ayes and 7 nays, the bill is passed to engrossment. Will hold there, Senator Kolkhorst.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator Hinojosa of Nueces, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business on SCR 13.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider SCR 13.
Members, Senator Hinojosa moves suspension of... Senator Nichols, I'm sorry, for what purpose, Senator Nichols?
I just asked a question.
Senator Hinojosa, do you yield?
I do.
You recognize Senator Nichols.
How many votes does it take to suspend?
Suspend the regular order would be 4/5.
20?
That'd be 24.
That's interesting. How many votes have you got to suspend?
I'm hoping I have enough.
How many people did you ask if they were willing to suspend?
Well, I asked for co-authorship and I got more than enough there, but you're right that I understand your point.
You asked me to suspend?
No, sir.
You want to ask me now?
Senator, would you be willing to suspend?
Yes.
Thank you.
Members, Senator Hinojosa moves suspension of the regular order of business on SCR 13. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out the following resolution. Secretary will read the resolution.
SCR 13, urging the U.S. Department of State and United States section of the International Boundary and Water Commission to take appropriate action to ensure that Mexico complies with the 1944 treaty regarding shared water resources.
Senator Hinojosa, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption.
Members, Senator Hinojosa moves adoption of the resolution. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
There being 30 ayes and 1 nay, the resolution is adopted. Congratulations, Senator Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator Middleton, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 19.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take and consider committee substitute for Senate Bill 19. Member, Senate Bill 19 will ban the practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying in Texas. The Texas Constitution states this: all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit. And as Abraham Lincoln said in his Gettysburg Address, we are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. He did not say we are a government of the taxpayer-funded lobbyists. Taxpayer-funded lobbying is the use of public funds by political subdivisions of the state for registered Austin lobbyists. And this is done in a couple of ways. Either directly hiring or contracting with someone required to register as a lobbyist under Chapter 305 of the Government Code, or through the payment of public funds to a nonprofit association that primarily represents political subdivisions of the state and employs or contracts with a person required to register as a lobbyist under Chapter 305. And it is fundamentally wrong that nearly $100 million of local taxpayer money is squandered annually on Austin registered lobbyists that act as a middleman between local and state elected officials. Taxpayers don't need a middleman. Elected officials are supposed to represent our same constituents, our shared constituents directly, whether that's the state level or the local level. And better than an Austin lobbyist, every taxpayer has a state representative and a state senator to represent them in Austin. Senate Bill 19 encourages that direct communication between elected officials by removing this Austin lobbyist middleman. And frankly, this practice is waste, fraud, and abuse at the end of the day. Look, it's common sense to want a secure border, property tax relief, teacher pay raises, election integrity with citizenship verification of our voter rolls, parent-directed education for every child. But sadly, your tax dollars have been used to lobby against and help defeat all of those policies that really the vast majority of all Texans want to see happen. And organizations like the Texas Association of School Boards even used your tax dollars to lobby against a bill that would have stopped men from going into girls' restrooms, locker rooms, and showers. And a problem even bigger than this is forced speech. If you don't like what a private company is lobbying on, don't shop there. For example, if you don't like what Target lobbies for, don't shop at Target. If you don't like what Bud Light stands for, don't buy Bud Light. But if you don't like what your local government is lobbying on, quit paying your property taxes, and what happens? Someone comes and takes your property. Now, this bill does not affect chambers of commerce, parent-teacher associations, fire associations, police associations, or teachers associations. Those are individual dues-paying organizations, and individuals have a choice whether or not to join those associations. But taxpayers, on the other hand, they have no choice but to pay for those taxpayer-funded lobbyists they're very likely to disagree with, and that's that forced speech. And this bill does not ban or prohibit associations like Texas Association of Counties, Texas Municipal League, Texas Association of School Boards from providing legal services, advice, risk pool insurance, continuing education, legislative tracking with bill reading, bill analysis, bill recommendations, sending newsletters, or providing other regular updates to political subdivisions. Of course, as long as those associations do not hire someone under Chapter 305 as a registered lobbyist. None of those services I just described require someone to register as a lobbyist, not one of them. This bill does not prohibit local elected officials or their staff from communicating with members of the legislature or using public funds to travel to Austin to testify before the legislature. There is an exemption from registration in the code for local elected officials and their staff as well. And at the end of the day, this is really what it comes down to. All levels of government are elected to directly represent our constituents' voices here in Austin without that lobbyist middleman, and the rights belong to the people, not the government. Taxpayer-funded lobbyists fundamentally disrupt how our constitutional republic is supposed to work by using the people's tax dollars against them. And with that, I move suspension of the regular order of business.
Senator Nichols, for what purpose?
To ask Arthur some questions.
Do you yield, Senator Middleton?
I do yield, thank you.
You're recognized, Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, at the beginning of the session, I had several conversations with you about this bill. Yes?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And I know at least one of those meetings, Senator Betancourt was also in there. And the reason I encouraged him to come to that meeting was because he introduced the first taxpayer-funded lobby bill 2 sessions ago, which I supported. So
Senator Hall and then Betancourt, and this is, I think, the 4th time we've had this on the floor here in the Senate.
Okay. And last session, you had a similar bill, not identical, but very similar with a similar approach. I also, last session, visited with you numerous times about that bill. And we worked together trying to come up with a resolve. Do you recall that?
Yes, we visited a lot about the issue, both sessions actually, the last session.
I just want to make sure that the members don't think that I'm trying to come up here and just talk to you for the first time about this. I really, and it's important for everybody to know this, I really do want to vote for a taxpayer-funded lobby bill that eliminates taxpayer-funded lobbying and get it to pass both chambers as well. If it doesn't pass both chambers, it's not going to get there. I'm not talking about watering it down. But I voted for Senator Betancourt's bill. I could not vote for your bill last year for some of the reasons we'll discuss. But I really do want to vote for your bill this year, but I have some concerns. And I've expressed some of those concerns. The first has to do with the definition of a lobbyist. So I will ask you, is there anything in your bill that changes the current definition of lobbyist under 305?
Right, so no, the bill is triggered by when someone has to register, and so what that is defined is in the government code under chapter 305, it's direct communication to influence legislation. Now there's some exemptions and other restrictions on it, but that's kind of the high level definition of it.
In simplicity, there's two categories. One is an expenditure category. The other has to do with time. And so the simplest to define is in the expenditure category. What 305 says under current law is that if you receive compensation of more than $1,940 in a quarter, so that works out to be less than $700 a month. If you are paid compensation of more than $700 a month for 3 months, and you come down and you advocate for to members, member staff, committees and things like that, if you meet that threshold by 305, you are required by Texas law to register as a lobbyist. Do you disagree with that?
So yes, there are two thresholds. One of them is hours, you're right, 40 hours, and the other one, of course, is the compensation where you're paid to influence the outcome of something. So generally, yes, there is one more where if you give gifts, that's what I would call a taxpayer-funded entertainment lobbyist. So if you're giving more than $970 per quarter in gifts, then you would need to register. Sure sounds like a bad idea to me, but that's in the government code.
For simplicity, what I'm going to be referring to as I go through my questions are the simplest of all and easiest to define, and that is if you are compensated $1,940 in a 3-month period of time, and you're talking to members or their staff, and you're trying to influence the legislation, you are a lobbyist, and you shall register as a lobbyist according to Texas law. Do you disagree with that?
Assuming you hit the 40 hours, but yes, yeah.
It doesn't even assume the 40 hours. 40 hours is a time thing. The compensation is separate.
Compensation alone is not enough. Otherwise, it fits into the incidental lobbying category.
All right. Well, even if you throw in time, that's preparation time, getting ready for it, staff, all those kind of things. So pretty easy for some people to hit 40 hours. It's very easy to measure the compensation. So like I said, I really want to pass one, and I want to support your bill, but I'm very concerned about a few small things in your bill that I think may have, and I will say may have, unintentional consequences that will silence some of the people in my district that I think are very worried about this bill. And I'm talking about some of my county commissioners, I'm talking about some of my city councilmen, some of my school board members. They're really worried about this. They talk to me every time I go home about it, and it's concerning to me. So I think it's not something that can't be fixed or clarified, because I think it will. Some of the things that are different from the Betancourt bill from 2 sessions ago versus your bill last session, or let me just focus on the bill before us, there's a couple of things that are different. One of them, in his bill, he specified the actual political subdivisions that it applied to. in your bill, you refer to not only the political subdivisions, specific political subdivisions. Your bill says it applies to every subdivision, political subdivision of the state. Would that be a true statement?
Yes, it's all political subdivisions of the state.
So we're not just talking counties, schools, and cities. We're talking river authorities. We're talking about groundwater districts. We're talking about a Houston Port Authority, the Port of Beaumont. We're talking about all the navigation districts in the state, all those kind of things. And there's more. I mean, I don't even know how many different political subdivisions there are, but it's a lot. Do you happen to know how many different types of political subdivisions we have?
It is a lot. You know, I mean, we have over 1,200 ISDs, we have 254 counties, over 1,000 cities, but at the end of the day, it comes back to the premise of your local property tax dollars shouldn't be going to Fat Cat Congress Avenue lobbyists. That's what the bill's about, and I personally believe that all taxpayers should be treated equally in that, and we shouldn't be discriminating against taxpayers just because they're from a small city or a county, or they're only in one or two different taxing entities, and saying, well, you don't deserve that protection, because you're from a small area. I think all taxpayers should be treated equally.
And I agree with you. That's why I really want to vote for this bill. And I agree with you on that statement. But whereas his was specific to the political subdivisions, yours say any type of political subdivision that the state creates. I can't even, and when I ask you how many different ones there were, I'm not talking about how many school districts and so on. I'm talking about different types of political subdivisions. Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 200? I will tell you, I've been here 20 years. I couldn't answer that question. I don't know. What I do know is I constantly am finding out about new types of political subdivisions all the time. And I don't know what the ramifications are to some of these political subdivisions, because you have to think about each one at a time. But regardless, I don't think they should use taxpayers' money to go out and contract with lobbyists. I agree.
And backing up a little bit, the Ethics Commission sunset bill is up this session, and we had a lot of back and forth on what if those registration thresholds are correct, or if there are issues with them, and we can definitely look at that, with that Ethics Commission sunset bill that'll be before this body this session. So we don't always have that chance to do that, but we actually do this session.
Okay. Another different thing between the bill, I call it the Bettencourt bill from 2 sessions ago, which I voted for. Everybody in the chamber voted for, most everybody in the chamber. Let me rephrase that. Not everybody. It passed real easily, though. Another thing has to do with his bill referred and made a difference between a contract lobbyist and a full-time employee, whereas your bill includes anybody who's on the payroll, who's employed by one of these subdivisions, political subdivisions, or somebody they may represent their membership, and a contracted. So that's a big differentiate. A full-time employee, outside contractor. Would that be a true statement?
Well, so you have to think about the fact that not all of the association's employees are registered lobbyists. And I can walk you through, just a few of them. So, for example, TASB has 492 employees. Can y'all believe that? 492. That's a lot. If we're going to look for savings for schools, we can start there, right? But that's about 1% of their employees are registered lobbyists, so 5. Texas Municipal League has 233 employees, 8, which is about 3.43% of their employees are registered lobbyists. Texas Association of Counties has 179 employees, and that's between 3 and 5% of their, so 9 of their full-time employees are registered lobbyists. So it's pretty, That's not a big percentage, and the reason why that the percentage is not huge on that is because of all the other services that I talked about earlier that don't require you to register, like the risk pool, the bill tracking, the legislative analysis, the legal advice, all the different things, the training of commissioners, county judges, school board members. All of that's not part of lobbying, doesn't require you to register, and that's why you see those percentages right now.
I wasn't asking about percentages. I was talking about the differences between that bill and your bill, being that that bill had differentiated. It only went after the contract lobbyists. It excluded those who were full-time employees.
It went, I would say it went further than that, because even if you weren't a lobbyist, you couldn't communicate with the legislature on issues regarding taxes. So even if you weren't registered, you couldn't talk to us about tax issues. So that actually is a step farther than this, because this is only about registered lobbyists, and that bill took that extra step there on that.
It doesn't refer to the registered lobbyists. The bill refers to somebody who could meet that definition under Chapter 305. Doesn't mean everybody that should be a registered lobbyist is registered as a lobbyist. I think most of us know that. There's a lot of people that meet the definition that in 305 we just went over earlier that don't register. I was talking about the differences. The other bill differentiated from 2 sessions ago, went after a contract lobbyist, somebody who's not a full-time employee, whereas your bill says if you hire somebody that meets these definitions or you contract, do you at least agree to that?
Yeah, and you know, the reason why associations are in this bill is that's a pretty big loophole. Like Texas Associations of School Boards, you know, is opposing parents every day. They, you know, even opposed a bill, Senator Parker's bill last session, that said if a child is groomed or sexually abused, then those parents get school choice, whether public or private, and they used parents' tax dollars to oppose that. That's wrong, and we should certainly not protect that or reward that type of behavior where taxpayer dollars are being used to weaponize against what parents want and what's right for them. And so, no, we make sure that...
I'm not trying to defend using taxpayer money to hire lobbyists. I'm concerned about the unintended consequences of what we might be defining in here and how it could be applied. That's my concern. So I'm not disagreeing with you on some of your statement. Another thing you have in your bill that was not in the bill from 2 sessions ago has the ability to sue. So you lift that threshold of sovereign immunity, and you allow anybody that's in that political subdivision, if it's a voter or taxpayer or something like that, if they feel like they're in violation, that they can actually sue for, I think you call it injunctive relief.
Right, it's just injunctive relief. There's not damages or anything. It's just if you're not following the law, you can sue to make them follow the law. You know, we passed a lot of stuff around here where they don't follow it, and then we come back, like Senator Flores' camping ban, which that does have a monetary penalty in it because we had to, but this is just injunctive relief is all.
Injunctive relief doesn't allow them to go and get extra compensation for damages, stuff like that, but it does allow them to recoup, specifically in the bill, their legal bills. So if I think if there's somebody who meets any of these definitions in Chapter 305 that's either with a political subdivision, which could be hundreds of them, so if we think somebody thinks a port authority has an employee that met that definition, then they could sue the port authority and make them stop doing that kind of stuff. So the way I understand it.
It's just to enforce the law. You know, it's not punitive damages or, you know, some kind of jackpot litigation thing. It's just, you know, making sure that our code, you know, our government code is followed. That's all.
Right. I think, and I was trying to say this earlier, I think it is really important that we make sure that these political subdivisions feel very comfortable about coming down here. If they're worried that, you know, their membership dues going to an organization who might accidentally trigger one of these things, if they get sued, well then the political subdivision can get sued and they might have to get rid of an employee or tell that employee you can't come down and talk to them anymore. And so it's something that really bothers me. Is it your intention, specific question, is it your intention of the legislation to change that comfortable feeling of our city councilmen and city staff and county governments and stuff from coming down here? In other words, really don't want them down here? Or do you really want them down here?
No, we definitely want them down here, and this actually encourages that, because right now, a lot of the small cities and counties, I have this letter right here from the city of Lago Vista. It says, taxpayer-funded lobbying hurts small cities like Lago Vista. And the reason why is they can't compete against Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, some of the big cities that can hire those directly hired lobbyists you talked about earlier. And I know you don't agree with that practice either, as I don't. But they're not able to compete, and it actually increases the voice from especially rural Texas, because they're not able to compete right now with all of those Congress Avenue lobbyists. And so their voice will actually be louder, as will the voice of our constituents at home, because right now those lobbyists are being paid to drown out our constituents' voice. They're at home working. They can't be here every day. And now lobbyists that are against what they believe in are paid for with their own tax dollars to come to committee here and walk the hallways and oppose the stuff that they believe in. And that's why this practice is fundamentally not right, the way that's happening.
Well, I will assure you that the way this is written, it's sending shockwaves out there with a lot of small entities that are really nervous. They feel uncomfortable coming here already. I want to make sure that my county judges, my county commission, my city managers, you probably knew I used to be on the city council and mayor. I was city council and mayor for 9 years. Small town, we didn't have a lot of resources. We had to hire an attorney. We didn't have an attorney on staff. And so I learned a lot. We, at one time in this chamber, actually had we call it the mayor's caucus. There was like 5 or 6 former mayors sitting here on the chamber. We actually included one county commissioner, just because he was elected at a local level. I think Senator Menendez, aren't you the, of course my questions are to you, but I believe Senator Menendez used to be on the city council. But other than he and I don't think there's anybody else on the floor. You did serve city council, county judge over there, so we do have a few. But I will tell you, in these small communities, I'm talking really small, they don't even know what they don't know. And so they're dependent upon, like in the cities, Texas Municipal League, in the counties, you mentioned some of the county associations. I know current law makes an exception for a county association. I'm not so sure it was that specific which one, but a lot of my county judges and my commissioners, they feel comfortable with the County Judges and Commissioners Association, which is a dues paying. They pay dues, which certainly meets your definition. So if the county pays dues, and all of a sudden somebody in either that nonprofit organization or at the county level violates the threshold under 305, they can get sued.
No, because there's an absolute exemption under the law for employees of local government from having to register to lobby. So no, they would not be sued under that. And we want to hear from our local elected officials and their staff. And actually, those taxpayer-funded lobby groups are the ones that are making it hard for them to come up here and discouraging it. Texas Municipal League has an ethics code for their City Managers Association. And part of that code of ethics is they say they don't want city managers coming here to Austin. That's wrong, because it's rent-seeking behavior to get them to hire registered lobbyists. And that's the kind of thing that we see with this practice, unfortunately. And you've always got to ask the question, there is a lot of waves over this, but you have to ask this question: is there an incentive for lobbyists, taxpayer-funded lobbyists, that may lose their paycheck to lie? Is there an incentive?
I support all of that part of the bill. For one of the first things I said is I want to vote for a taxpayer-funded lobby prohibition. I'm with you on that. I'm worried about some of these details. You talked about an exemption. There is a specific exemption here. It says you can come down, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, unless you're in violation of Chapter 305, which means if you get paid more than $700 a month for 3 months, and you come down to Austin to testify, you are in a violation of 305. Because you have to register as a lobbyist.
Well, so the Ethics Commission has their guidance right here.
I got one too.
Yeah, on page 9, a government officer or employee who communicates to influence legislation or administrative action is not required to register.
Is what?
Not required to register.
Well,
I mean, that's on their website, and it was updated on 1/1/25, so it's new.
What's in the actual code says it a little bit different. Registration is required if you meet the 40 hours or fewer. It refers to the $1,930 in a calendar quarter. Counts for if there's 40 hours or fewer during the calendar quarter registration and the things you're talking about. But to come down here, you can spend a day or two to come down here. It's real easy. It's real easy to hit that threshold. That's my point. They certainly make more than $700 a month. So it's not hard to hit that threshold. And what they're doing when they call me, they're in effect cranking up the time, influencing legislation. If I call, like Senator Perry's got a lot of big water session coming up, so I spent a lot of time talking to my river authorities, to the paid employees who get more than $700 a month. And so I'm asking, is this good for you? Is this bad for you? What's the deal? How should this all work? And so in effect, they're talking to me, and it'd be really easy for them to slip into this category of being a lobbyist that needs to register under 305. That's my concern.
No, that unfortunately is not correct. Under Chapter 305, it says an officer or an employee of a political subdivision of the state does not have to register, does not require them to register.
Even if they make $1,340 a month?
Even if they make $1,340 a month, even if they spend an unlimited amount of hours, the only time you'd have to register is if you give a lot of gifts, and I don't know anyone doing that. So that's why I don't see anyone that works for a city, county, or school district as an employee registered up here.
I think people are reading that differently. There's difference of opinion. I keep hearing there's a difference of opinion. It could be considered either way. If I send my city councilman, as a small town mayor, I had a city city manager. And he was paid more than $700 a month. If I sent him down to come down and testify and stuff, he's certainly going to rack up the hours.
He does not have to register.
I had some of the other small city council. I had a mayor of a very small town who knew Summerfield. He worked for me. I knew he was mayor. I didn't realize how really small that town was. We were working in the factory one day, had a meeting, and he gets this call, and we had to stop the meeting because the pump went out in the city municipal water supply. He had to reach in his pocket, pull out the city checkbook, and write a check for that. And otherwise, the city would have been cut off. That's how small a communities I'm talking about. If they don't have something like the Texas Municipal League to help them, advise them, and work their way through these problems, they're totally lost. They would never know how to come down here. And so you're paying dues over there. So if they're using the Texas Municipal League and Texas Municipal League uses one of their employees, then they could very easily cut this threshold.
Well, I'll tell you how it works now, and I think it would continue to work. So we had an example in committee. I think it was a Pecos County judge was here. And he said, it was a last minute notice for the bill. And he said, I was able to get up the next day and come over. And he said, I'm on a 2-week rotation, I think is what he said. And when I'm on that 2-week rotation, Texas Association of Counties puts out a little alert of, the bills they're for and against. And this particular bill is this one. He was against, and Texas Association of Counties was against. They gave him all the information he needed, right, to come up. And he presented to committee, he went to members' offices. None of that requires anyone to register because he's a local elected official. They can continue to do that in how they operate. They even had a rotation system with local elected officials from far off. Pecos County's a long way from here. And they had a rotation system with local elected officials to make it convenient for them to be up here and then organize in a way to support or oppose legislation. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's working right now, and that's how it'll continue to work under this bill.
Some of these, let's call them nonprofit organizations like TML or county judges and commissioners, some of those kind, we talk about the school ones as well, the association, TASB and some of those groups. I don't always like what they say. I get very frustrated, like a lot of us do, when we have a bill and they come down and they testify against it. It's very frustrating to me, but it's still a democracy. We don't want to shut those voices off, which is what the very first thing I was concerned about. I'm truly concerned that what you're going to do, because so many of these exceptions refer to unless they meet the qualifications. Now, when you put that other factor in that allows an individual from any of those subdivisions to sue that entity, that adds a whole nother factor. I'm not an attorney, I'm a small town engineer, and I have been sued a lot by attorneys who will look for any reason to sue. And if they think they can get money, legal fees, by finding a loophole in here, and it won't take long, it really won't take long, I don't think, to find some loopholes where, now we got you, and using your bill as it is, then they're going to get sued. And then if they get sued, then their political subdivision says, hey, we can't pay you any dues anymore. And then they get disconnected, and all of a sudden these small communities don't have a voice. That's where my concern is. The unintended, I don't think you intend to do that, but I'm really concerned that's what's going to happen. And I think it's so important for them to have a voice.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
And that will continue.
Okay.
And it will actually grow their voice because they're not having to compete against a lobbyist that could get paid $1 to be on the other side. That's the problem. That's why the Texas Press Association supports this bill, because there's a lot of transparency too. When you have a fiduciary duty, it matters a lot more. And I can tell you, someone that works for a city or a county or school district, we're not even talking about elected officials, but then an employee, they have a fiduciary duty, that county, city, or school district. So if they said they were against a bill that city was for, if they said they were for a bill that city was against, they would get fired. But with these hired gun lobbyists, guess what happens? If they get found out, they just get fired and go work for someone else. And there's also open records. You can see their cell phones. You can see their emails. It's adopted in the budget. There's all kind of other good things that happen when it's someone that works for
I
that entity.
foresee if this bill passes as it's currently written, and I'm enthusiastic to go after what you're concerned about and what most of us, I'm enthusiastic to do that. But what I see happening is I can see a ton of lawsuits heading out and to try to trigger and separate out these, a lot of these nonprofit organizations that represent some of these small communities, whether it be city, county, schools, or whatever. I've got over 100 schools by themselves. Is there anything that you would consider? Would you consider any changes at all to your bill? Because I have a very small suggestion.
I would be happy to look at it, but at the end of the day, we've got to protect all taxpayers from the unethical practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying. And I don't believe you're going to see this litigation. The election integrity bill was one of the most complicated and great bills we passed in this body, Senate and House, and it had a lot of causes of action in it. And we have not seen this bonanza of litigation or trial lawyer activity. When you've got a simple remedy of injunctive relief of, hey, just follow the law, that's not going to lead to something
when we
wild
open
and
it up
outrageous
to
like you're
suing
saying.
political subdivisions over the definition of what a lobbyist is, I think you're going to see a lot of lawsuits, because that's one of the things that's different in this bill than other. But I can very simply explain what I'm concerned about. if you take out two words that are side by side, it would get me 95% there. Two words. And those two words are hire or, right in front of contract, which exempts the employees, the full-time employees of those political subdivisions and those nonprofits. Because what we were trying to go after, what's really, I've never had we all represent just under 1 million people. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have been chewed out by the best of them. I think a lot of us have. But that's how I learned in my district. And not one single time have I ever had any of my constituents say, Senator Nichols, I'm so mad because my city pays dues to TML, or my county pays dues to the county association. What they're mad about are the public funds, the taxpayer funds. And I've got some, when I represented the city of Conroe, at the same time Senator Creighton was on the House side, they voted to spend $50,000 to go out and contract with a lobbyist who happened to be their city councilman. You remember that one? All right. Which really caused some interesting things. But that's the kind of stuff that makes people mad. I've got one of my mid-sized cities, one of the bigger ones, kind of midway up. I'm not going to say their name. But they decided they would go hire one of the big contract firms here in Austin. Not talking about a Texas Municipal League or County Association. They hired one of the big lobby firms everybody in here would recognize. I'm not going to say their name either. But they did. And I'm going, what are you doing? They said, well, we got to have somebody to represent us down there. I'm going, have I ever not picked up the phone? Has your house member never not picked up the phone? Don't we always call you back? And it was like, yeah, and they got the former mayor and the new mayor trying to explain to me why they had to do that. And I'm going, so now instead of me talking to you, you want me to talk to the lobbyist? That's kind of backwards. I said, your taxpayers would be furious if they knew you did that. And I've got some others that do it, but not too many. I see this more in big urban areas than I do in my small little rural areas, because most of these people kind of know what's going on in their city. But the two words that would get me 90% there is eliminating the word hire and or right in front of the word contract, so that we would at least exempt the full-time employees so that we can focus all of us together and go after the contract lobbyists. That's my 95% request.
Well, so here's one of the issues with that. We all lived through the SB2 debate, right, in this building. And unfortunately, a lot of taxpayer dollars was used by Texas Association of Counties to lobby against voter-approved property tax limits, voter-approved. And not only that, Texas Municipal League, for example, has a training manual. They've renamed it since we called it out, but it's called Shaking the Money Tree. How to generate more fees. Well, who's the money tree? The money tree's us. It's taxpayers. And then Texas Association of School Boards. The Texas House Doge Committee just had about a 12-hour hearing on how taxpayers are getting raked over the coals with the buy board, the Lone Star Investment Pool, which is about $20 billion of school district reserve funds that is exported out of state, actually. Their risk pool that they make $150 million a year off of. And it goes on. And the training monopoly as well. They've got largely a monopoly on school board training. And I actually am aware of a school board member that says, I don't support what TASB does. They're not going to the training. And somebody has threatened that school board member with removal from office.
My question is pretty simple. I'm concerned. I don't like some of the things they do. I get very frustrated. I've spent many long nights in these committees with people in this chamber arguing with some of these nonprofits, county associations, cities, and even some of my political subdivision employees. But I think they have a right to do that. Where they draw the line, in my opinion, is when they go outside that and hire contract lobbyists, what we would all call a contract lobbyist. And most of us, there's some of them that are gun for hire. There's some of them that are pretty large organization. So I ask you, and I will tell you, it's a simple little amendment. It's about a half page. It also, to get from 95 to 99 to 100%, that clarifies when you take out the word hire and or, you add this, clarifies this does not apply to full-time employees. So that way they couldn't even hire part-time employees to do that. And I already have it drafted, and I have a Ledge Council draft. What I don't want to do is this is an important bill. It's a low number bill. It's an important bill for you. It's an important bill for all, well, not necessarily all of us, but a lot of us. And I really want to vote for this bill. And, and so I hate to put something like that up and it be considered a hostile amendment. Because I'm not really being hostile, I'm trying to be hopeful. And make sure the voices back home can be heard. So would you be amenable to something like that?
Well, what this bill does is it does protect those voices back home, and it continues to allow all the associations you've talked about, because when I hear from local elected officials, they talk about all the other things that aren't lobbying, right? The risk pool's one of them. Bill tracking is one we hear the most about probably. The legislative alerts, the legal advice, all the training requirements. Open records is another big one. None of that requires you to register to lobby. None of that requires you to register.
You have
but what your amendment does is it protects registered lobbyists.
It protects the
my bill
full-time.
It doesn't impact those services. But you're proposing an amendment that would protect registered lobbyists.
Under 305, we just went over the definition. It's a very low threshold.
Maybe I'm hearing you wrong.
There's a very low threshold. And if you want to call them a lobbyist, you could call my city manager a lobbyist. You could call the people at the river authorities lobbyists because they're spending the time and the money to influence legislation. That's not who we necessarily really fight the most. Anyway, that's my issue. And you won't really say yes or no. I've got the feeling the answer is no. But what I'm going to do, members, is I'm going to go ahead. I've got them already printed. I was holding back. I'm going to go ahead and put them in the stack for y'all's consideration. Mr. President, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nichols. Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
To ask questions of the author, sir.
Do you yield, Senator
Thank you.
Middleton? You're recognized, Senator Eckhart.
Thank you so much, Senator Middleton, and thank you, Senator Nichols. You asked many of the questions that I had, so I deeply appreciate that. As a former local elected official, counties and cities and all of these special taxing entities, of which I think the last count, credible count that I saw, there are 5,533 political subdivisions in the state of Texas that include the counties, the cities, the ISDs, and special purpose districts. That's a lot, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, that's a lot.
And each of those 5,533 entities are required under open meetings to set their schedules for meeting in advance. In the case of cities and the counties, they meet at least every week. What do you suggest to these local elected officials when a hearing comes up on a day that they are scheduled and noticed to run an agenda in their local community? Who should they dispatch?
So most likely, they already have someone organized through either some of the associations that we discussed earlier. So that's the most likely scenarios we see very often, where we have, a commissioner come from far away or from nearby. And a lot of times they are from your area because they happen to be the closest by, correct? So, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to represent our constituents directly. And that's what they're doing.
Then why did we create 5,533 local governmental entities?
Do they all need to be here?
I'm asking you why if we alone represent Why did we create 5,533 local governmental entities?
Those are political subdivisions of the state, and that is a lot. You're right. But you know what? We don't have lobbyists. The state doesn't. And we're, as elected officials, supposed to keep up with each state representative and each senator with every single one of those commissioners' courts, ISDs, city council members. We've never said, you know what, gosh, that's a lot to keep up with. The state needs to pay for lobbyists, so we have our voice heard in city council. So we have our voice heard in commissioners' court. So we have our voice heard in the school board meetings. No, we've never said that because we know that our job is to represent our constituents directly, and it should work that way across the board.
What harm do you see in an association utilizing a staffer who must register as a lobbyist to represent the interests of those association members that the members themselves have determined is their legislative platform?
Well, as you know, most of the associations, or all actually almost, that show up in committee, it's usually an elected official that's a member. So like the president of the Texas Association of Election Administrators is usually a county elected official, which, yes, there is an absolute exemption from them having to register to lobby. And that's how it's supposed to work. Like with the Pecos County judge example, he was on a 2-week rotation. Well, that's under the current law, and that's allowed if this bill passes as well. And that's how it should work because it's much more effective to hear from someone who's there because they believe in it, not because they're paid for it, but because they believe in it.
Do you see in an association's staffer representing the platform of the association that has been determined by its elected members?
Well, I'll give you a little example with the County Treasurers Association. We had this issue last session. So Galveston County, we had someone that ran for Galveston County Treasurer's office. And his sole platform, only thing he ran on, let's get rid of the office. Well, he won. He beat an incumbent without a runoff. The voters spoke, right? So they spoke on that. He was victorious. Well, what did he do? He showed up next session, this was his last session, and he said, I'm going to deliver on my campaign promise. I need y'all to get rid of the county treasurer's office. Our voters have spoken. Well, what happened after that? The County Treasurers Association used taxpayer dollars to oppose that, oppose local control, oppose what we wanted in Galveston County, and then even after that, when we passed it in the legislature, they organized political opposition like the Fort Bend County Treasurer, Dallas County Treasurer was campaigning against the constitutional amendment of what we passed in the legislature. So clearly our tax dollars are being used against taxpayers' own will.
Have you ever heard the term tyranny of the majority?
I have.
So you raise an interesting example because, as you'll recall, I voted for your bill.
I recall you doing that.
To get rid
yes.
of your treasurer in that county.
Thank you for your vote, Hill. I recall that. Hill.
I respect the Treasurers Association position that was in opposition. How is that a problem that the Texas Treasurers Association had a different position than you and I?
Because they're using tax dollars against the will of voters.
But it wasn't the majority will of the treasurers.
No, they were just using tax dollars to try to tell Galveston County what to do, even though Galveston County voters didn't want to do what they were advocating for.
Don't we have a right to peaceably assemble and petition our government for redress?
And the rights belong to the people. They don't belong to government. It is powers granted by the people. And if we're going to say we're going to put the rights of government above those of the people that created government, we have a huge problem.
Well, we have a representative democracy, don't we?
A constitutional republic.
And as the representative of your district, how many times have you gone to Washington, D.C. to directly lobby for the interests of your district or the interests of the state of Texas?
It's been a long time since I've been to Washington, D.C.
Do you have any opposition to the Texas Office of State and Federal Relations hiring contract lobbyists to lobby for the interests of the state at the federal level?
So OSFR is like, say, Travis County Government Relations. I think Julie Wheeler's her name, if that's right. She's government relations. She's not a registered lobbyist. She doesn't have to register. She's a full-time employee of Travis County. And that's actually how OSFR works. It's the Office of State Federal Relations, and they are employees of the state.
But OSSFR has hired the Ferguson Group in 2021, 2022, and 2023 as hired contract lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Isn't that correct?
Well, they're not employees anymore, and they don't have registered lobbyists anymore. But I believe that was a law firm for TCEQ. So in the state of Texas, they wouldn't have to register under our state 305 laws. A law firm is exempt when influencing the administrative action, essentially. It's under our government code. I can cite it to you right here, but basically, the federal rules are different, and they were just a law firm representing the TCEQ, and the state does not have registered lobbyists.
So you would be in favor of applying this law to our state government as well?
In a separate bill, I would, yes. It's not germane to this one, but in a separate bill, I would support it.
Why not just what's good for the goose is good for the gander?
Well, we have to live by our rules that we've adopted and we've all voted for. I think we all voted for those rules that determine that rule of germaneness. House has it too. It is what it is.
It's often quipped in this chamber that there really is only one rule here.
Well, our parliamentarian, I guess, determines, what's germane and what's not. So, thank you, Senator.
Thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Questions of the author, Mr.
Do you yield,
President.
Senator Middleton?
I do. Thank you.
You recognize Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Middleton, during the layout of your bill, you mentioned that it was your understanding that TASB had argued against the bathroom bill. Do you have any materials, documents, or training? Because I've asked that question because I've heard it and I hadn't seen any.
Sure, that was Senator Colcourse, Senate Bill 6. I have some more recent information here. This one is called Transgender Students, What You Need to Know. It invited transgender, non-binary, gender-diverse students to train school board members on pronouns. So that's more recent. Of course, Senate Bill 6 was, I believe that was the first called session in 2017. Bill authored by Senator Colcourse. I believe it passed the Senate, didn't make it through the House. They added it again. Didn't happen in the House again.
But I guess the question was, did you have any evidence that said that they had been advocating against the bill? Because I just hadn't seen anything to that effect.
Oh, yes, they registered against it, yeah.
Okay, I see. They registered against it. All right. What about on the buy board? You mentioned something about buy board, that the buy board is something that costs schools districts, but my understanding, buy board does not charge any of its members to use it, but the Texas Run Purchasing Co-op does charge school districts.
I don't know how the buy board is not making money when they issue millions of dollars in rebates. Where's the extra coming from? Of course, it also, I was referring to the risk pool insurance, which is, of course, highly profitable, and also the Lone Star investment pool, where TASB charges a royalty, essentially, to manage our school district reserve funds. That's about $20 billion they're managing, and we've since discovered that a lot of that money is going out of state to out-of-state money managers and banks, and our community banks aren't even benefiting from it. So unfortunately, these dollars are being levied locally, right? Local property tax dollars are going into reserve. It's being exported out of state, and then the profits are being cycled somehow back into a slush fund to pay for these lobbyists. They're in this building.
The Texas Run Investment Fund is being run by managers out of Pennsylvania, and the TASB one is run by folks here in Texas. Let's move on to another set of questions. I was looking over the list of people who testified in opposition, and would it surprise you that on the list we had the Texas Association of School Administrators, Texas PTA, Texas County Treasurers Association, Texas Association of County Auditors, Texas Public Power Association, and the list goes on. Texas Teaching Hospitals of Texas. Now, teaching hospitals, some of our city councils, all of our school boards, those are all voluntary positions, aren't they? People aren't paid to be on those boards, aren't they?
A lot of political subdivisions are kind of like us, where it's generally volunteer.
Voluntary, right.
I mean, we're not now because we got our per diem, but $600, a month. It's close to it most of the time. Some of them are zero, though. Some have a stipend, some don't. Most don't because they're too small. They can't afford it.
I understand, and I guess that's where I'm going. That one of my concerns, very similar to listening to our good friend Senator Nichols, is that many small municipalities, counties, teaching hospitals, associations, their policymakers can't afford to be tracking all the bills, can't afford to be down here all of the time or at a moment's notice. So in essence, when they pay into an association, it's for them to get the pooled benefit of their membership dues, to get a benefit of having access to the information they need to make the best decisions. And so in essence, the taxpayer funds that they're putting into the system are helping them represent their constituents. And that's one of my concerns with this bill, is that if you were to do away with this, if your bill becomes law, then I am really worried that many small associations, whether it's school districts, whether it's city councils, whether it's a teaching hospital, would no longer have a voice in Austin. We could be their voice, but we're also tasked with passing our bills and tracking 9,000 bills that were filed this session alone. So it's, we have 1 million people that we individually represent. We cannot keep track of every single issue. So what are your thoughts in terms of the fact that these taxpayer funds help small school districts, small cities have representation here? And that's the concern that I have with your bill.
Right, and our intent, and it does not either in reality abolish the associations. They're going to continue to exist. They're going to continue to provide that service that's valuable for small cities, counties, school districts, you name it, whichever political subdivision it is, in the bill tracking and legislative analysis. And we see that in action every day around here in every committee that you and I serve together on. What we do often hear from a city council member from a 1,000-person city, or a school board trustee from a 500-person school district, or a very small county with 10,000 people in it, and nearly 100% of the time they've received that information from an association of here's a bill, here it's good or it's bad, and then they come to committee and they are communicating with each other. Well, not everyone can be there. There's no reason to have all 254 counties here every day. Most of the time we do agree with positions with each other. I know sometimes there are local issues like on windstorm, which is one of the things that always bothers me, and the taxpayer-funded lobbyists never support us in lowering our windstorm rates. I file that bill every session and they never show up in committee, and that's 14 coastal counties. I mean, you can't be bothered to support us in that. But it is already working that way, and it will continue to work that way, where they provide that information, they're tracking, making sure that local elected officials and their staff are getting that information. None of that requires you to register, and it is a service that I hear often from constituents and others that they want to make sure they maintain that, and this bill does that.
So what exactly is the problem that you're trying to solve with this bill? That's what I'm trying to find out, because I feel as if, I don't know how many sessions you filed the bill, or a bill like this has been filed, but obviously the state's been going on for over 100 years. I can't tell you how many years we've had taxpayer-funded lobbying, but for those of us who served, when I served on city council, we were paid an honorarium of $20 a week, capped at $1,000 a year. And so we had to have real jobs on the side, because you couldn't be a city councilman with that kind of pay. We needed professional help to keep track of all the legislation that was going on. So I'm trying to identify, you know, it feels like the state's been working fine, you've been passing bills, this may not be one of the ones you've wanted to get passed, but what is it we're trying to solve?
So taxpayers' dollars are being used against them. You know, I'll give an example in the Education Committee. It's one of the first examples that really just, in my mind, I realized how egregious and wrong this practice was, where there was a mom, she had taken off work, and she stayed up till midnight to support this bill that she wanted for her daughter. And she would not go home because she said, I can't take off another day. I can't do that. This is all I've got is this day. She got there in the morning, like always, you know, bill's supposed to be heard at 8 and it's midnight, you know. And she said, please pass this. Please give my daughter this chance. She's special needs. I need to send her to a private school. I can't afford it. Please let her have this opportunity. Right after that, a lobbyist got up and testified against her with her own tax dollars. They were used against her. No one paid her to show up. She was there because she believed in it. And as we see all the time, when our constituents are here, it's because they believe in something. And so often, they're having to fight someone that they've paid for that they don't agree with. It's forced speech. The rights belong to the people. They belong to our constituents. And it's just fundamentally not right when their taxes are levied by force against them and then used against them with a hired registered lobbyist. That's Congress Avenue lobbyists. So at the end of the day, what this does is it protects our separation of powers and our constitutional form of government. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what this does.
But Senator Middleton, just like that very impactful story of the mom who stayed late because she took the day off, the lobbyists who testified on the opposite direction may have been representing thousands of people who agreed with that position or disagreed with that mom. So my point is, you know, we have 5.4 million kids in our public schools. We know that not all of the parents of those 5.4 million agree on everything that we propose in this building. We've had the debate recently on education savings accounts, right, or vouchers, however we want to call them. And so if the position the mom was asking for was for help to send her kid to private school, but maybe by passing that bill, that would take resources out of the school districts that were needed to serve the other schools whose parents might not be able to take them. Maybe that person was lobbying on behalf of hundreds, if not thousands, of other parents. I appreciate you answering my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator. And the problem is, you know, you think about, you know, TASB, for example, you got districts that pay into Robin Hood and districts that receive Robin Hood. How can you possibly represent both? And that really kind of sums up that problem.
Members, Senator Middleton moves suspension of the regular order of business. Committee substitute Senate Bill 19. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
19 ayes and 12 nays. The rule is suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Committee substitute Senate Bill 19. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 19 relating to the use by a political subdivision of public funds for lobbying and certain other activities.
Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 1 by Middleton.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. All this does is clarify that hiring or contracting with an outside lobbyist, that's obviously already in the bill on line 38. And this is for those directly hired guns that work or are contracted by a political subdivision, not through an association. So obviously this is just clarifies that it's hired or contracted. Currently the bill says hired. This is hired or contracted.
Members, Senator Middleton moves adoption of floor amendment number 1. Is there objection? There is objection. The Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Agenbu, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa of Nueces, Hinojosa of Hidalgo, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwartner, Sparks, West, and Zaffarini.
There being 20 ayes and 11 nays, floor member number 1 is adopted. Members, I've got to slow down up here just a little bit. Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 2 by Middleton.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, obviously this bill does not apply to constitutional officers, and our sheriffs are constitutional elected officials. Apparently, there have been other bills that we passed in previous sessions that have confused the line between them and political subdivisions of the state. So this just makes it clear that an association or organization that solely represents elected sheriffs are not in this bill. So the bill does not apply to elected sheriffs, associations, or organizations.
Members, Senator Middleton moves adoption of floor amendment number 2. Is there objection? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, floor amendment number 2 is adopted. Members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 3 by Eckhart.
Senator Eckhart on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. You heard the exchange with the author that Senator Nichols and myself separately had with regard to associations. This amendment would carve out representatives of local governments and associations that represent local governments to ensure that they still have a voice in legislative business. As this bill is currently written, these individuals are prohibited from advocating on or against legislation if they are required to register as a lobbyist. Members, there are so many local officials who do important work through their associations to ensure that the perspective of local governments are understood here in our halls. I am fortunate to represent a district where my local elected officials are here and available to engage, but many of you represent districts that are hundreds of miles from this building and who rely on their associations to effectively participate in the legislative process. These associations are devoted to representing the interests of their members, and they do the tedious work of monitoring what happens in this building and keeping members who are focused on running their own local governments informed. So I offer this amendment so that those associations can continue to do that good work for their members.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. I respectfully oppose this. So basically what it does is it guts the bill and allows them to hire lobbyists directly or through associations. So it's contrary to the purpose of the legislation. It actually does the opposite of what we're going for here.
Okay. Members, Senator Eckhart moves adoption of floor amendment number 3. It is opposed by Senator Middleton. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Madam Secretary, please continue calling the roll.
Forgot where I left off. Creighton, Eckhart. Hagenbu, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa of Nueces, Hinojosa of Hidalgo, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwertner, Sparks, West, and Zaffarini.
My apologies, Madam Secretary. There being 11 ayes and 20 nays, the amendment fails. Members, the following amendment, Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor amendment number 4 by Eckhart.
Senator Eckhart on the amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. This is what's good for the goose is good for the gander amendment. What this amendment does is it applies the same rule to state lobbying efforts at the federal level. To be fair, the Office of State and Federal Relations, what is it, OSF? Relations. OSF no longer has paid contract lobbyists, from what I can tell from their publicly available records. So this wouldn't change any of their current activity. But all it would say is that local governments created by the state, as well as the state itself, would not be able to use contract lobbyists to represent their interests. But importantly, it exempts matters regarding the military. That's exempted from this section, so that we would still be able to use paid lobbyists with regard to military installations and whatnot.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to call a point of order that Senator Eckhart's amendment is not germane to the bill under Rule 715.
Please bring your point of order forward, Senator Middleton. Senator Eckhart, would you join us? Senator Eckhart, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. Based on the ruling of the parliamentarian, the amendment is not germane, but I have a commitment, yes, from the senator to work on a separate bill to do this very thing.
The permission of our colleagues to introduce a bill late, but I fully support this policy, so.
Thank you.
Senator Eckhart?
So I'm pulling down the amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Members, Senator Middleton withdraws the point of order. Senator Eckhart pulls down the amendment. Floor Amendment number 4 is withdrawn. Senator Campbell, for what purpose?
That's an accident.
Okay, members, there is an amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment number 5 by Nichols.
Members, we're going to wait for the amendment to get to the back row. We're going to take our time here. Senator Nichols on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This members describes exactly what I said. It replaces the word on line 38, hires are, and gets, and then clarifies at the bottom related to that doesn't really apply to full-time employees, and that way we narrow it down to contract employees.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Nichols. I mean, I'm going to have to respectfully oppose this because it allows registered lobbyists, and it also allows them to essentially play a shell game and just say that they're contract lobbyists or their employees, and then that's fine. They can continue as they are now and get around the bill and the purpose of the bill. And the other point on this is that it is in Chapter 305 of the Government Code that they are not required. So an employee or local elected official is not required to register under this code. They're not required by the state, and it's why the Texas Ethics Commission makes that abundantly clear on page 9 of their lobby registration guide that you don't have to register if you're a local elected official or their staff. So for these and other reasons, I oppose the amendment.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Mr. President, question to the author of the amendment.
Senator Nichols, do you yield?
Yes.
So you recognize Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Nichols, you and I were discussing a few minutes ago and our concerns that small communities, cities, counties, others, are very worried about the passage of the bill as written. All you're trying to do is help them have the capacity to be represented here in Austin, Texas. And that's all your amendment does. And I think at the same time you asked me, why did we exempt the Sheriff's Association? Isn't that what we had a conversation about just a few minutes ago?
I had nothing to do with that amendment.
No, I understand that.
I'll answer a question about my amendment.
So, okay, I asked the first question was, are you not just trying to help the small communities who are afraid of the repercussions, the potential repercussions of this?
I'm trying to narrow this down to contract lobbyists and define it by those who are not employed as a full-time person.
Are most of
does
those,
not even include, anyway.
I'm so sorry. Go for it. Finish.
No.
Are most
I'm trying
of
to
those
narrow the
communities
difference between a contract lobbyist and a full-time employee.
Right. Are most of the communities that you mentioned are concerned small, sometimes rural communities?
A lot of them are rural. I mean, 80% of the geography of the state is rural. you've got 80% of the people live in urban suburban, and this body is represented by urban suburban. Predominantly, there's about half a dozen of us that represent truly rural areas.
It's my understanding that there are parts of the Panhandle that are closer to Denver, Colorado than they are Austin, Texas.
That has nothing to do with my bill.
In a sense, it does. And this is what I'm saying. If they're so far away, it is that much harder for those voluntary rural elected officials to get to Austin. And all you're trying to do is help them by being members of the association.
I grew up in a small town. We're not used to people visiting us very often. And so our representation is pretty slow down there. And when my mayor of one of my towns pulls the city checkbook out without help in some fashion and having some type of association to go and talk to, he would have no idea what we're doing down there or how to come down and even testify on a bill. So yeah, it helps a lot of small, but it helps the large ones as well.
I appreciate your amendment because I think it also brings fairness. And the reason I brought up the Sheriff's Association is because your amendment would bring fairness to those small communities that the Sheriff's Association is getting by the author of the bill. Thank you for answering my questions.
Senator Betancourt, for what purpose?
Ask questions of the author of the amendment.
Do you yield, Senator Nichols?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'll yield.
You're recognized, Senator Betancourt.
Senator, I think the primary objection is the fact that the bill does not state clearly that a full-time employee of any political subdivision in the state does not have to register as a full-time lobbyist. Now, if we could write that amendment here in a few minutes and submit that, I think that would go 95% of the way to resolving the issue.
That would not include the nonprofits that they rely on?
Right, that would not include the nonprofits at this time.
My amendment and the way the bill was written includes nonprofits. And since we're opening up we're going to sue these people chapter to the bill, I think we need to be really careful.
Well,
no, I would not be acceptable to that.
Well, Senator Nichols, I know you have a strong opinion on the matter. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the intention, and even though it's in tangential pieces of code, that's not in the bill. I think that if we made it clear to every political subdivision in the state that any full-time employee would not have to register as a lobbyist, I believe that would take 95% of the angst out of this discussion. And I would intend upon offering that amendment if this amendment goes down, because I believe that's really the crux of what this debate is about.
I would like to see a vote on this amendment.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answering the question.
Senator Middleton on the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Members, what this would do is it would allow registered lobbyists to continue, unfortunately, to use taxpayer dollars to lobby against us. So I respectfully oppose the amendment.
Members, the motion before us is Senator Nichols, floor amendment number 5. Senator Middleton opposes. The secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hagenbu, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa of Nueces, Hinojosa of Hidalgo, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, Menendez. Sorry, couldn't see you. Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwartner, Sparks, West, Zaffarini, Creighton, Gutierrez, Miles, West,
There being 15 ayes and 13 nays, the amendment is adopted. Senator Middleton, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move passage to engrossment for committee substitute to Senate Bill 19.
Members, Senator Middleton moves passage to engrossment. Is there objection? There is objection. Secretary? Yeah, I need to. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook,
There being
Creighton.
20 ayes and 11 nays, the bill is passed to engrossment. Will hold there, Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Schwartner, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. Take up and consider Senate Bill 706.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take up and consider at this time Senate Bill 706. Members, this bill would require that Texas recognize all valid out-of-state license to carry permits. Texas's license to carry reciprocity law has not been revisited since 2003. And it's time to modernize this statute and have Texas join the 20 other states which provide for universal recognition of valid out-of-state licenses. Texas currently has the majority of the other states in reciprocity. Senate Bill 706 would allow for universal license to carry reciprocity. Mr. President, members, I move suspension of the regular order of business to take and consider Senate Bill 706.
Members, Senator Schwartner moves suspension of the regular order of business on Senate Bill 706. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook,
There being
Creighton.
26 ayes and 5 nays, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 706. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 706 relating to the recognition of a handgun license issued by another state.
Senator Schwartner, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage to engrossment, Senate Bill 706.
Members, Senator Schwartner moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco,
There being
Campbell.
26 ayes and 5 nays, the bill is passed to engrossment. Senator Schwartner, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved, Mr. President.
Members, Senator Schwartner moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Butterworth, Blanco.
There being 26 ayes and 5 nays, rules suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill 706. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 706 relating to the recognition of a handgun license issued by another state.
Senator Swartner, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage of Senate Bill 706.
Members, Senator Swartner moves final passage, Senate Bill 706. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
26 ayes and 5 nays. The bill's finally passed. Congratulations, Senator Swartner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator Flores, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. Take up and consider Senate Bill 1451.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, during the interim, we heard numerous concerns about the increase in all forms of theft, including various fraud and forgery schemes. Senate Bill 1451 addresses the issue of theft and fraud involving checks. The bill simply enhances the criminal penalty for the offense of stealing or receiving a stolen check. The bill amends the penal code to elevate this offense from a Class A misdemeanor to a state jail felony. And thank you. I'm open for any questions.
Members, Senator Flores moves suspension of the regular order of business on Senate Bill 1451. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 1451. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 1451 relating to increasing the criminal penalty for the offense of stealing or receiving a stolen check.
Senator Flores, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move passage to engrossment.
Members, Senator Flores moves passage to engrossment. Is there objection? Hearing and seeing none, bill is passed to engrossment. Senator Flores, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved, Mr. President.
Members, Senator Flores moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
There being 29 ayes and 2 nays, the rule is suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill 1451. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 1451 relating to increasing the criminal penalty for the offense of stealing or receiving a stolen check.
Senator Flores, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move final passage.
Members, Senator Flores moves final passage Senate Bill 1451. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell.
29 ayes and 2 nays. The bill's finally passed. Congratulations, Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members.
Members, the following bills on first reading in reference to committee. Secretary will read the bills.
Senate Bill 2425 by Nichols relating to the regulation of automated motor vehicles to transportation. Senate Bill 2880 by Hughes relating to abortion to state affairs.
Members, we're getting ready to begin a new legislative day. Chair recognizes the Dean of the Senate for a highly privileged motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn until 8:37 Wednesday, March 19th, in memory of Darrell Carter, constituent of Senator Miles.
Members, is there objection? Chair hears none. Senate stands adjourned until 8:37 Wednesday, March 19th.